She slammed the folder down so hard the water glasses rattled. "You people," Councilwoman Darla Hewitt said, not bothering to lower her voice, "have been bleeding this city dry for 20 years with your little feel-good projects and your grant applications. And she waved her hand at Zuri like she was shooing a fly, your people. And I am done writing checks for it." The conference room went silent. 12 executives sat around that table. Not one of them said a word. Zuri Ashbourne stood at the front of the room, her left foot screaming inside her shoe, her PowerPoint slide still glowing behind her projected impact: 2,400 low-income patients served annually, and she did not flinch. She had learned a long time ago not to flinch in rooms like this, because the moment you flinched, you were finished. But her hands gripped the edge of the podium just a little too hard. If you have ever stood in a room full of powerful people whilst someone tried to make you feel like nothing, if you have ever had to smile while someone talked over you, around you, through you, then you already know exactly what Zuri Ashbourne felt in that moment. The question is, what would you have done? If this story moves you, stay with us until the very end, because what happens in the next 2 hours will change the way you think about strength, guilt, and what it actually costs to repair a broken thing. Subscribe to our channel so you never miss what comes next. Drop a like and tell us in the comments, what city or country are you watching from? I want to know how far this story has traveled. Now let's go back to the beginning. Because to understand what happened in that 34th floor conference room on a cold November afternoon in Jersey City, you need to understand one thing about Zuri Ashbourne. She had been hiding pain for a very long time. Not the kind of pain that makes people feel sorry for you. Quiet kind. The kind you tuck away so deep that some mornings you almost convince yourself it isn't there. The kind you cover with a good blazer and a professional smile and 23 minutes of frantic stair climbing, because the elevators in a 34-story office building chose that particular Tuesday to go out of service on the east side, and Zuri was already running late, and she was absolutely not going to call the front desk and explain that she needed a different route because her left ankle had been swollen since August, and she hadn't told anyone about it. That was just not something she did. So she climbed. Floor 2, floor 5, floor 9. By floor 14, her jaw was clenched and her breath was coming in short pulls, and her left foot had gone from aching to burning to something beyond burning that didn't have a clean word for it. By floor 22, she was gripping the railing with both hands and hauling herself up step by step like it was a different kind of work, entirely. By floor 30, she had stopped thinking about the presentation altogether and was only thinking about the next step, and then the next one, and then the one after that. She made it. Of course she made it. Zuri Ashbourne always made it. She pushed through the 34th floor stairwell door at 2:23 p.m., which put her 23 minutes behind schedule, and she walked into that conference room with her shoulders squared and her presentation materials tucked under one arm, and that practiced unreadable smile already in place. "I apologize for the delay," she said, setting her laptop on the podium. "Traffic was brutal this afternoon." Everyone nodded. Traffic in Jersey City was always brutal. Nobody looked at her feet. Almost nobody. Kwon Si-hyeok had been sitting in the back corner of that room since 2 o'clock. He did that sometimes, arrived early, said nothing, let other people fill the silence with the sound of their own importance. He found that you learned more about a person in the first 30 seconds of watching them than in 30 minutes of listening to them talk. He was 52 years old now, but most people guessed younger, because Si-hyeok had the kind of self-containment that reads as agelessness. He wore a dark charcoal suit that had cost more than some people's monthly rent, and he sat with his hands flat on the table in front of him, completely still, the way a man sits when he has spent decades training himself not to betray what he's thinking. Publicly, Kwon Si-hyeok was the chairman of Hatem Meridian Group, an international shipping and logistics corporation with major freight routes running between Busan, Incheon, Los Angeles, and the eastern seaboard. The kind of company that moved cargo quietly and efficiently and didn't make headlines unless it chose to. Privately, he was something else entirely. Something that most of the people in that conference room understood only in the vague, careful way that people understand things they'd rather not examine too closely. You didn't get to control shipping routes along the eastern seaboard without cultivating relationships that existed outside the normal boundaries of business. Si-hyeok had cultivated those relationships methodically over 2 decades, and the result was an organization that operated in the spine between legitimate and not, between visible and invisible, between what could be proven and what could only be suspected. He was not a good man. He had never claimed to be. But he was an exceptionally observant one, and the moment Zuri Ashbourne walked through that conference room door, something pulled at his attention in a way he couldn't immediately name. He watched her walk to the podium. She was composed. Professionally composed, the kind of composure that doesn't come naturally. That gets built over years of navigating rooms, where you're the only person who looks like you, the only person who came up the hard way, the only person whose margin for error is measured differently than everyone else's. He recognized that composure because he had built the same kind himself in different rooms, for different reasons. He watched her set up her materials without fumbling, connect her laptop with practiced efficiency, call up her presentation slide with one smooth keystroke. And then he looked down. Her left shoe. There was a faint dark stain spreading across the fabric near the ankle. Not dirt. Not water. Something warmer toned, slightly irregular at the edges. Si-hyeok had seen enough injuries in his life to know what that stain was. He had also spent enough time watching people move to understand what he was seeing in her stride, the very slight, very controlled shift of weight away from her left foot every time she stepped. If you weren't specifically looking for it, you'd never catch it. She had worked hard to make sure of that. She opened her presentation. Good afternoon. My name is Zuri Ashbourne. I'm the executive director of the Renewal Foundation, and I'm here today to propose a partnership that I believe will create measurable, lasting impact for approximately 2,400 low-income patients annually in the greater Newark area. Her voice was clear and even and carried the room without effort. Si-hyeok sat very still and watched her. The presentation was excellent. That was the honest truth of it. Zuri had put months into those slides, the demographic breakdowns, the cost per patient projections, the outcome data from comparable programs in Baltimore and Detroit, the community survey results she'd gathered herself by going door to door in 3 different Newark neighborhoods on 2 Saturday mornings because she couldn't afford to hire someone to do it for her. Every number was sourced. Every projection was conservative and defensible. She had anticipated every pushback question and built the answers directly into the structure of the presentation, so the objections dissolved before anyone could properly voice them. She was 32 years old and had been running the Renewal Foundation for 4 years, and she was very, very good at this. What she was not good at, what she had never been good at, and had never tried to become good at, was asking for help. She had been on her own since she was 19, not because her family was terrible, but because the situation had been complicated in ways that required her to choose between waiting for someone to rescue her or figuring out how to rescue herself, and she had made that choice once and made it permanent. She had put herself through college, working 2 jobs and a string of grants. She had built the Renewal Foundation from a one-room operation running out of a rented church basement to a nonprofit with a real budget and a real staff and real outcomes that real patients talked about in real terms that therapists who didn't. Give Up on Me, that program that got me back to work after the accident, that intake coordinator who called 3 times and never made me feel like a burden. She built all of that by being the person who never admitted she was struggling. The strategy had worked. For years, it had worked beautifully. She wasn't going to examine too closely what it had cost her. She was most of the way through her second section, projected 5-year sustainability model, when Councilwoman Darla Hewitt, who had been visibly impatient since the opening slide, put down her pen and leaned back in her chair and said, "Can I stop you there?" It wasn't a question. "These numbers are very pretty," Hewitt said, "but what I don't see is any meaningful private sector commitment. You're asking for public investment in a program that can't demonstrate it has sustained corporate interest." And frankly, she paused, with the precision of someone who knows exactly how much damage a pause can do. I've seen a lot of these proposals. They come in, they look wonderful on paper, and 18 months later we're having very uncomfortable conversations about accountability. Zuri kept her voice completely neutral. If you look at slide 14, you'll see the 3-year retention data from our Baltimore counterpart program, which demonstrates. I've seen the slide. Hewitt waved it away. What I'm asking about is commitment, not data. Commitment. The commitment is demonstrated by the data. The commitment, Hewitt said slowly, with great patience, like she was explaining something to a person of limited understanding, is demonstrated by who shows up and signs on the dotted line. And what I see here is a very thorough document prepared by a very dedicated small organization that does not have the kind of partners that make this city's institutional investors feel confident. She hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't said anything technically wrong. But the air in the room had changed, and everyone around that table felt it change, and nobody said anything, and the silence stretched out in that particular way that tells you exactly where the power sits. Zuri's left hand was pressed flat against the podium. Her ankle was radiating heat up her entire left leg. She breathed in through her nose, slow and controlled, and she thought, hold. Just hold. I understand the concern, she said. I'd like to address it directly. Please. And then, from the back corner of the room, a voice said, how many floors did you climb? The question didn't make sense at first. Several people turned to look at Si-hyeok. He hadn't moved, still sitting with his hands flat on the table, his expression completely unreadable, his eyes on Zuri. Zuri went very still. I'm sorry, she said. The East Bank elevators, Si-hyeok said. They've been out since noon. Building management sent a notice at 1:15. He paused. You came from street level? A beat of silence. I took the stairs, Zuri said. Her voice didn't change. All 34 floors. It wasn't an Nemam either. Zuri looked at him directly. Something shifted in her expression just for a fraction of a second, just long enough for Si-hyeok to catch it, before the professional composure snapped back into place. I apologize again for the delay. Now, if I could return to... You walked 34 floors on that ankle, Si-hyeok said, still in that same quiet, even tone, and then you walked into this room and told everyone it was traffic. The room was completely silent. Zuri's jaw was tight. Mr. Kwon, I'm not criticizing you, he said it simply, with no performance in it. I'm noting it. There was a quality to the silence after that Zuri couldn't quite categorize, something that made the space around her feel different, like the air pressure had shifted. She became aware, in a way she hadn't been a moment before, that she was standing in a room full of people who had all just understood something about her that she had not intended for them to understand. She pulled her shoulders back slightly. The proposal speaks for itself, she said. I'm happy to answer any remaining questions about the... I have one more question, Si-hyeok said. She waited. The abandoned center on Grafton Avenue in Newark. Do you know it? And this time, the shift in Zuri's expression lasted a full 2 seconds before she caught it. She didn't know why that question hit her the way it did. She knew the building vaguely, the way you know buildings you've passed 100 times in a neighborhood you've worked in. A square brick structure, set back from the street, boarded windows on the ground floor, a chain-link fence with a faded city notice attached to it, the ghost of old signage above the door that you'd have to stand very still in certain light to make out. She had driven past it on her way to clinic appointments. She had thought, more than once, that it had the bones of something useful, the right size, the right layout, the kind of solid mid-century construction that actually held up if someone cared for it. She had thought about it, and then she had thought about something else, because there are 1,000 buildings like that in every city, and you can't carry all of them. I know the general area, she said carefully. Si-hyeok looked at her for a long moment. Then he stood up, which made everyone in the room shift, the way people shift when a large and quiet thing decides to move. I'd like to speak with Ms. Ashbourne privately, he said. Not to Zuri, to the room. If you'll excuse us for 20 minutes. Hewitt opened her mouth. 20 minutes, Si-hyeok said again, in a tone that was not aggressive and contained no threat but somehow foreclosed argument entirely. Hewitt closed her mouth. The private meeting room on the 34th floor had a wall of windows looking out over the Hudson, and in the November rain the water was the color of old pewter, and the far shoreline was barely visible through the gray. Si-hyeok didn't look at the view. He sat across from Zuri at the small table, and he put his phone down face up between them, which she later understood was a deliberate choice. Look, I'm recording nothing. This conversation is just a conversation, and he said, you need to sit down. I'm fine, Ms. Ashbourne, I'm fine. He looked at her for a moment. All right, he said, and let it go. He would learn, over time, that with Zuri Ashbourne you had to choose your battles, and that the battle over her sitting down was never going to be one you won. What do you want to ask me, she said. Have you ever been in this building before today? No, you're certain. I've never had any business with Hedam Meridian before this proposal. Si-hyeok was quiet for a moment. Interesting, he said. Because according to our visitor records, you were here in May. 6 months ago. Zuri stared at him. That's not possible. I pulled the record this morning. He picked up his phone, turned it toward her. The screen showed a scanned visitor log date, time, name. Ashbourne, Zuri. May 14, 10:47 a.m. Your address. Your phone number. Your professional credentials. He paused. The signature is very close to yours. Close enough that our reception staff accepted it. Zuri's mouth was dry. What did this person access? Si-hyeok's expression shifted barely, but she caught it. Foundation property records. Specifically, records related to an acquisition we made approximately 6 years ago. Grafton Avenue. Yes. They looked at each other across the small table. Zuri's ankle was still throbbing. The rain hit the windows in irregular bursts. She became aware that she had walked into something she did not fully understand, and that the woman she had been 3 hours ago, the woman who climbed 34 floors and called it traffic, would have stood up right now and said thank you for your time and found the nearest exit. She didn't stand up. Tell me about the Grafton Avenue property, she said. He told her some of it. Not all of it. Si-hyeok was not a man who revealed everything in a first conversation, but enough. A foundation acquisition 6 years ago. A planned rehabilitation center for injured dock workers and their families. Project that had been approved and funded, and then quietly killed, the money redirected, the records muddied, the building left to accumulate city violation notices and decay. He didn't tell her why it had been killed, or who had killed it, or what it had cost him to eventually find out. That part he kept in the part of himself. He kept everything. What he did tell her was that someone had used her identity to access those records. And that the same day, those records were accessed, May 14, something else had been delivered to Hedam Meridian's legal department. An anonymous envelope, no return address, containing a detailed timeline of the foundation fund diversion. Names, account numbers, transfers, the kind of documentation, Si-hyeok said carefully, that someone spent a very long time assembling. Why would someone use my identity to deliver that? Because an anonymous accusation against a man like me goes into a file, and the file goes into a drawer. A documented identity creates a paper trail. It creates a person who can be questioned, subpoenaed, called as a witness. Except that person isn't me. Except that person used your name. He paused. Which means either someone chose your identity at random, or someone chose it very deliberately. Zuri felt the hair on her arms stand up. Think back, Si-hyeok said. 6 months ago. Did anything unusual happen? Someone asked for your identification. A situation where you might have set down your ID badge and come back to find it moved? She started to say no, and then she stopped. April, 7 months ago, not 6. A temporary medical outreach clinic that had operated for 3 weekends in a parking lot off a side street in the South Ward. She had volunteered 2 of those weekends, doing intake assessments for patients who couldn't navigate the regular clinic system. It had seemed like exactly what it was, a grassroots operation, a little underfunded, a little disorganized, run by a coordinator named Marcus, who was enthusiastic and scattered and always slightly behind on everything. She had worn a badge both weekends, a plastic clip-on with her name and photo and credentials. The second weekend, the second Saturday, she had set the badge down in the storage room while she helped Marcus move boxes of supply kits that had been delivered to the wrong area. She had come back 20 minutes later, and the badge was there, but it was facing a different direction than she'd left it. She had thought, and clipped it back on, and kept moving. There had been a man outside, near the fence that separated the parking lot from the adjacent vacant lot. She'd noticed him because he was there both days, same position, same fence, different clothes, watching with the patient, contained attention of someone who wasn't there by accident. Splittington. She had thought about mentioning it to Marcus, and then hadn't, because you notice a lot of things in that kind of neighborhood, and most of them don't mean anything, and you learn to calibrate. And someone had photographed the volunteers. She remembered that, too, a woman with a camera introduced briefly as someone doing a community documentation project. Everyone had smiled for the camera without thinking much about it. She told Si-hyeok all of this. She watched his expression as she talked. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. Then he said, the coordinator, Marcus, what did he look like? She described him. Si-hyeok picked up his phone and typed something. A moment later, he turned the screen toward her. It was a corporate registration document. A shell consulting company, 3 years old, incorporated in Delaware. The listed contact was the man she had just described. The company, Si-hyeok said, was a vendor for Hatem Meridian. 6 years ago, for approximately 8 months, he paused. The contract was authorized by a member of my executive team, a man named Park Jun-seo. He said the name in a way that meant something. Zuri waited. Park Jun-seo was my most trusted advisor, Si-hyeok said, for 12 years. He set the phone down. He was also the person who convinced me to cancel the Grafton Avenue project and redirect the foundation funds. The rain intensified against the windows. Somewhere in the building, a phone rang and was answered and went silent. He set this up, Zuri said. He set something up. Si-hyeok's voice was controlled and careful. What I don't yet understand is why. He created a false identity using my information. He staged the clinic to get access to my badge. He used my name to deliver evidence against you to your own legal department. She laid it out steadily, the way she laid out case data, because it helped to think in structures when the ground was unsteady. That's not a random act. That's deliberate. Yes. So either he wants you exposed or he wants me connected to your exposure. She looked at Si-hyeok. Or he wants us in the same room. Si-hyeok looked back at her. Neither of them said anything for a moment. Mr. Kwon, Zuri said finally, I need you to understand something. I don't know you. I don't know your organization. I don't know the full extent of what happened with that foundation money or who else was involved. And whatever is happening here, I am not interested in being anyone's instrument. I know, I mean that seriously. I know that too. He said it without any edge. I noticed that about you approximately 45 minutes ago. She looked at him sharply, trying to decide if that was condescension. It wasn't. It was just a statement. Someone built a trail, Si-hyeok said. The trail leads here, to this conversation. He paused. I don't believe in coincidences at this scale, which means someone believed that if you and I were put in the same room, something specific would happen. What? He looked at her for a long moment. I think, he said slowly, that they believed I would finally stop ignoring the Grafton Avenue building. The quiet between them was different from, before less guarded, more uncomfortable, the way quiet gets when the conversation has found something true. Zuri's ankle was still hurting. It had been hurting for months. She had learned not to hear it, the way you learn not to hear traffic when you live on a busy street. But in the stillness of this room, she could feel every beat of it. I need you to be honest with me about something, she said. Ask. The people who did this, your former advisor, whoever helped him, are they a danger to me? He took his time before he answered, which she would later understand was one of the things that distinguished him from people who were simply powerful versus people who were powerful and careful. I don't know yet, he said, which is the most honest answer I can give you. I need to understand more before I can tell you what you're actually facing. That's not reassuring. No, he agreed, it isn't. They sat with that. Outside, the rain kept falling, and the Hudson stayed the color of old pewter, and somewhere across the river, a cargo ship was moving slow and steady through the gray water, its lights dim and its name too far away to read. Zuri thought about the presentation still glowing on a laptop in the conference room down the hall. She thought about the 2,000 400 patients and the outcome data and the 3-year sustainability model. She thought about the 4 years she had spent building something real out of almost nothing. She thought about a woman in a parking lot in South Ward, pointing a camera at a row of volunteers, and a man watching from behind a chain-link fence with the patient, deliberate attention of someone who had come there for a specific purpose. She thought about her badge, facing the wrong direction. "All right," she said finally. Si-hyeok waited. "Tell me everything you know about Park Jun-seo," she said. "And then I'll tell you what I want, in exchange for cooperating with whatever comes next." For the first time since she had walked into that building, Kwon Si-hyeok's expression shifted into something that was almost a smile. "You negotiate," he said. "Always," Zuri said. "That's not something I hide." The negotiation lasted 11 minutes. Zuri had expected pushback. She had built her entire professional life on the assumption that the first offer was never the real offer, that the first answer was never the complete answer, and that the people across the table from her would almost always underestimate how prepared she was. She had walked into rooms far more hostile than this one and walked out with what she came for, and she intended to do the same thing now, regardless of who Kwon Si-hyeok was or what his name was supposed to make her feel. She told him she wanted 3 things. First, full transparency about the Grafton Avenue property ownership history, the original rehabilitation center proposal, every financial record related to the foundation diversion. Not a summary, not a briefing, the actual documents. Second, her name removed from any internal Hayden Meridian records as a visitor, any system that showed her as having been in this building in May, any paper trail connecting her identity to Park Jun-seo's shell company, pending whatever legal process might eventually require those records to be preserved. Third, if Si-hyeok's investigation into Park Jun-seo produced anything that affected Zuri directly, any threat, any exposure, any situation where her name became relevant to something she hadn't chosen to be part of, she would be told immediately and completely, not managed, not briefed, selectively told. Si-hyeok listened to all 3 without interrupting. Then he said, "The first and third, yes. The second I can't do." "Why?" "Because if this reaches a federal investigation, which it may, those records become evidence. Altering them at this point creates a destruction charge on top of everything else." He paused. "I'm not going to create a new problem to solve an existing one." Zuri studied him. "You're telling me you're worried about a federal investigation. I'm telling you I'm thinking ahead, which is something you clearly also do." He tilted his head slightly. "You researched this organization before you submitted your proposal." "Of course I did." "Then you know something about the nature of what I run." She didn't look away. "I know something about the public-facing structure." "Yes." "And you submitted the proposal anyway. The Renewal Foundation needs institutional partners with real capital and real logistics reach. Hayden Meridian has both." She kept her voice level. "I make decisions based on what my patients need, not on what makes me comfortable." Si-hyeok was quiet for a moment. Something moved behind his eyes, not quite respect, but something adjacent to it, something that had more weight. "All right," he said. "Then here is what I can offer, in addition to your first and third conditions. My legal team will document the identity theft formally, with a clear record establishing that the May visit was fraudulent and conducted by a third party using your credentials without your knowledge or consent. That protects you from any implication if the federal question does become active. I want my own attorney to review whatever document your team produces before I sign anything. Naturally. And I want a written record of this conversation. I'll have my assistant transcribe the relevant points within the hour." She looked at him steadily. "You agreed to that very quickly." "Because it's reasonable." He said it simply, without impatience. "I don't benefit from you being in a legally vulnerable position." "The opposite is true. Why?" He was quiet for a moment. "Because if you're going to help me understand what Park Jun-seo was actually trying to accomplish, I need you functional. Not scared, not defensive, not spending your energy managing a threat instead of thinking clearly." Zuri sat with that. "You think I can help you figure out his motive?" "I think you're already doing it." He glanced at his phone screen, then back at her. "You said it yourself. He wanted us in the same room." You and I are the only people here who can answer why. The answer, as it turned out, was not something either of them found that afternoon. What they found instead was the first thread, the one you pull before you understand what's attached to the other end. Si-hyeok had his head of security, a compact, stone-faced Korean-American man named Daniel Yu, bring the physical Grafton Avenue file to the meeting room within 30 minutes. It arrived in a brown accordion folder that had clearly been sitting in archive storage. For a long time, the edges were soft. The label faded. The rubber band holding it closed had lost most of its elasticity and snapped when Daniel removed it without any particular expression. Daniel set the folder down, looked at Zuri briefly, with eyes that cataloged her, in about 2 seconds, and communicated nothing, and left. Zuri and Si-hyeok went through the file. The original project had been substantial. 4,200 square feet of usable space. A planned roster of physical therapists, occupational therapists, and intake coordinators. A budget that was modest by corporate foundation standards, but carefully allocated with multi-year sustainability projections that someone had put serious thought into. The construction timeline had been approved. The contractor had been selected. The community outreach plan referenced 3 neighborhood associations by name. There was a cover letter at the front. 1 page, handwritten on foundation letterhead, signed by the original project director, a woman named Constance Yeo, whose title was listed as Director of Community Development, Hedem Foundation. Zuri read the letter twice. The relevant sentence was near the bottom. If this project is ever revived under new leadership, my strong recommendation is that the executive director role be filled by someone with direct clinical experience in rehabilitation and patient advocacy, someone who understands what it means to help an injured person rebuild their capacity for independent movement, not simply someone with the financial acumen to manage the budget. Zuri read the sentence a 3rd time. She set the letter down on the table between them. Si-hyeok was watching her. "This is what was in the anonymous envelope," she said. Not a question. A copy of it, yes, among other documents. And Park Jun-seo knew about this letter. He was in the meeting when Constance Yeo presented the project. Yes. So he knew that whoever used my identity to access these records would eventually lead you to this letter. She pressed 2 fingers against the edge of the page. He connected my profile rehabilitation specialist, nonprofit director, patient advocacy background to this letter specifically. He built the trail to end here. Si-hyeok said nothing. That means he wasn't trying to destroy you, Zuri said. He was trying to force you to finish what you started. The room was very quiet. Park Jun-seo redirected the money 6 years ago, she continued. You told me you eventually discovered the fraud. Did you confront him? A pause. Yes. What happened? Si-hyeok's expression closed slightly, the way a door closes when someone leans against it, not locked, but not open either. He denied involvement. The evidence I had at the time was insufficient to act on definitively. I removed him from the inner structure of the organization, reduced his access, but I didn't. He stopped. You didn't pursue it. I made a calculation, Si-hyeok said carefully. At the time, destabilizing my own structure to pursue a single internal fraud case was. You buried it, Zuri said, flat. Not angry, just accurate. Si-hyeok looked at her. Yes. And the community lost its rehabilitation center. Yes. And this building, she gestured at the window, at the city beyond it, is still standing. And that one isn't. He didn't answer that. There wasn't an answer for it that would have meant anything. Zuri looked back at the cover letter, at Constance Yeo's handwriting, slanted and precise, and 6 years old. She thought about the 3 intake assessments in a parking lot in the South Ward, a few blocks from a boarded-up brick building she had driven past without stopping. She thought about the man at the fence with the patient, deliberate eyes. Who is Constance Yeo now? She said. Something crossed Si-hyeok's face. She died, he said. 4 years ago. Cardiac event. Zuri absorbed that. Did she know the project was killed? She found out approximately 2 months after the funds were redirected. She resigned from the foundation. He paused. She submitted a formal complaint to the foundation's board before she resigned. The complaint was reviewed internally and determined to be, he seemed to locate the word with some difficulty, insufficiently documented. She was dismissed. Her complaint was dismissed. Yes. Zuri picked up the cover letter again and held it without reading it. Did she have family? Si-hyeok was quiet for a moment. A nephew. He currently works for a community development nonprofit in the South Ward. He paused again, and the pause had a particular texture. His name is Marcus Yeo. The silence that followed had weight to it. Zuri set the letter down very carefully. Marcus. Scattered, enthusiastic Marcus, who was always slightly behind on everything, who had persuaded her to help move boxes in a storage room while her ID badge sat on a table 20 feet away. He's not a villain, she said, before she had fully decided to say it. No, Si-hyeok agreed. He's a nephew who watched his aunt spend the last years of her life trying to correct something that was never corrected. And Park Jun-seo found him, or Marcus found Park Jun-seo. At this point, I'm not certain of the direction. He rubbed the edge of his thumb along the table's surface, the first restless gesture she had seen from him. What I am certain of is that this wasn't impulsive. The level of planning involved, the clinic, the documentation, the timing, the identity construction, this took a year. Maybe more. Zuri thought about that. A year of planning to put her in a room with a man she'd never met, carrying a letter written by a dead woman who'd spent her last years fighting a wrong that nobody fixed. She thought about what that kind of determination looked like, what it required. She understood it, which was the uncomfortable part. She understood it in a way that sat below argument. I need to go, she said abruptly. Si-hyeok looked up. I need to think, she clarified. And I think better when I'm not sitting in this building. She started to push back from the table, and her ankle caught her a sudden vicious spike of pain that she couldn't fully suppress, and her breath came out sharper than she intended. Si-hyeok stood. Ms. Ashbourne, I'm fine, you said that before. He didn't reach for her. He just stood there, very still, which was somehow more difficult to dismiss than if he had tried to help. You climbed 34 floors on that ankle. You've been sitting in this room for an hour and a half. Will sound like you've been telling yourself about the condition of that injury. I want you to consider that you may have been incorrect. She looked at him with her jaw set. He looked back at her with the expression of a man who was not going to be moved by jaw setting. I have a physician on staff, he said, here in the building. Not a favor, not an obligation, just an offer made once and not repeated. Zuri's hands were flat on the table. The pain in her ankle was doing something it hadn't done before. It had gone past the sharp spike and settled into a deep, grinding throb that she recognized, distantly and unpleasantly, as the kind of pain that meant something had been ignored past the point of easy recovery. She had known that, probably, for several weeks. She had been extremely skilled at not thinking about it. One question first, she said, yes, Park Jun-seo. Where is he now? Si-hyeok's expression did something very controlled. He runs a private equity consulting firm in Hoboken. Has for the past 3 years. He paused. He's not a man I would describe as someone who has been idle. You've been watching him, monitoring his activity. Yes. And in all that monitoring, you didn't see a year-long operation to put a rehabilitation specialist and your own visitor records in the same building? The muscle at the corner of Si-hyeok's jaw tightened. It was the first fully unguarded physical response she had seen from him. No, he said, I didn't. Why not? He was quiet for a long moment. Because I wasn't looking at Marcus Yeo. I was looking at Jun-seo's business associates, his financial moves, his contacts within the shipping industry. He paused. I was watching for a direct attack. Not for story, Zuri said. He looked at her. He didn't attack you, she said. He built a story, with a beginning and a middle and an ending that ends with you in a room, reading your own foundation's letter, sitting across from the exact person Constance Yeo described. She paused. You can't surveil for a story. You have to be willing to see it. Si-hyeok looked at her for a long time. Go see the physician, he said finally. Please. And something in the way he said that not commanding, not pitying, just direct, and without performance loosened something in Zuri that she hadn't realized she'd been holding rigid. 1 hour, she said. Then I'm leaving. The physician's name was Dr. Kim Sora, and she had the efficient, unsentimental, bedside manner who had spent years working in environments where you didn't have time for excessive gentleness. A sound like green splitting. She examined Zuri's ankle in a small medical room on the 22nd floor without commenting on how long it had clearly been injured, and Zuri appreciated that more than she would have been comfortable admitting. Grade 2 sprain, minimum, Dr. Kim said, pressing 2 fingers along the tendon and watching Zuri's face. Possibly 3. You've got some instability here that concerns me. She looked up. How long? August, Zuri said. Dr. Kim's expression didn't change. That's 4 months, yes. And you've been doctor. Kim gestured vaguely at Zuri's general existence. Working? Yes. On it, Dr. Kim sat back. You need imaging. I can refer you to an orthopedic specialist, someone outside this building. Someone you can verify independently. The ankle may need more than conservative treatment at this point. She paused. What you should not do is continue to climb 34 flights of stairs on it. That was a specific circumstance. It was also not the first time you've done something like that. I'm guessing. She looked at Zuri steadily. Zuri said nothing. I'm going to give you a compression wrap for tonight, doctor. Kim said, and something for the inflammation. But I want to be clear, this is a temporary measure, not a solution. If you leave here and spend the next week pretending this is fine, you risk the kind of damage that extends recovery from months into a year or more. She paused. I've seen people make that choice. It doesn't end well. I understand. I don't think you do, Dr. Kim said, not unkindly. But I'll say it anyway. Zuri was in the elevator going back to 34 when her phone buzzed. A number she didn't recognize. She stared at it for 2 full floors, then answered. Ms. Ashbourne. The voice was male, middle-aged, careful. My name is Park Jun-seo. The elevator doors opened on 34 and she didn't move. Don't hang up, he said. I know you're in Si-hyeok's building. I know you've seen the file, and I know that whatever he's told you about me in the last 2 hours, it's been accurate as far as it goes. A pause. But it doesn't go far enough. Zuri stepped back and let the elevator doors close again. What do you want? She said. To explain something that Si-hyeok can't explain to you, because he doesn't know it yet. His voice was measured, the kind of measured that comes from rehearsal. The Grafton Avenue fraud wasn't mine. I redirected the funds, yes. But I did it on instruction. From someone inside Si-hyeok's organization who told me that the rehabilitation center project was a liability that the community ties it would create would complicate certain operations in the South Ward area. A pause. I was 34 years old and I was afraid, and I made a catastrophic choice. You're telling me Si-hyeok had an insider who sabotaged his own project. I'm telling you that insider is still there. The elevator had stopped. She was between floors. The fluorescent light above her hummed at a frequency she could feel in her back teeth. Why are you telling me this now? She said. Why not just go to law enforcement? Why build a year-long operation using my identity without my consent? Because the insider has federal contacts, has had them for years. Any direct approach gets buried, has been buried twice. His breath was slightly uneven now, the rehearsed steadiness cracking at the edges. Si-hyeok's organization needed to implode from the inside. And the only way to make that happen was to give Si-hyeok a reason to look inward that he couldn't dismiss or redirect. A pause. You were that reason. I'm sorry for how I used your identity. I am genuinely sorry. That's not enough, I know. Who is the insider? Silence. Park Jun-seo, who is the insider? I'll send you a document, he said. Encrypted. Your attorney can verify it independently. Don't open it on any device connected to Hatem Meridian's network. He paused. And Miss Ashbourne, be careful with Si-hyeok tonight. Not because he's dangerous to you specifically. Because what you're about to tell him is going to break something in him. And a man like that, when something breaks, he stopped. Just be careful. The line went dead. Zuri stood in the stopped elevator for 4 seconds, breathing in through her nose and out through her mouth, feeling the compression wrap around her ankle and the deep ache underneath it, and the particular, nauseating clarity of understanding that the situation she had walked into was significantly larger and significantly older than she had thought. Then she pressed 34 and went back up. Si-hyeok was standing at the window when she came in, his hands behind his back, looking out at the Hudson. The rain had eased slightly, but the light was going. It was past 4 o'clock, and November came down fast. She told him about the call. She watched his back as she talked the set of his shoulders, the stillness that was different from his usual stillness, the kind of stillness that happens when a body is managing something that wants to move badly. When she finished, he didn't turn around for a long moment. "Say the last part again," he said. He said the insider is still active inside your organization, and that they have federal contacts that have been used to suppress 2 previous attempts to surface this. Si-hyeok turned around then. His face was controlled. His voice, when he spoke, was controlled. But there was something in his eyes that Zuri had not seen there before, something hot and specific and old, like an ember that had been banked for a long time and had just received air. "Daniel," he said, not loudly. Daniel Yu appeared in the doorway within 20 seconds, which told Zuri something about how closely he was stationed. "Get me the authorization records for the South Ward Community Operations, 2017 and 2018, and get Minji on a secure line." He paused. "And find out who signed off on the original Grafton Avenue cancellation memo internally. Not the financial record, the operational memo." Daniel's face showed nothing. He nodded once and was gone. "You believe him," Zuri said. "I believe that nobody constructs a year-long operation and then calls the target on the day of to explain themselves unless they're running out of time." He looked at her. "Jun Seo is scared of something. That means something changed recently." He paused. "The question is what changed, and when, and whether whatever changed is about to change things for us as well." Us. The word landed between them like something that hadn't been there a moment ago. Zuri noticed it. Si-hyeok noticed her noticing it. "That was presumptuous," he said. "A little," she agreed. He almost said something else. Then his phone buzzed on the table, and he looked at it, and whatever he saw there made the controlled expression contract into something briefly, unmistakably alarmed before he reassembled it. He turned the screen toward her. It was a news alert. "A fire in Hoboken, reported 17 minutes ago. A commercial building on a street in the waterfront district. The building that housed, according to its street address and the business registry she had memorized without trying, the private equity consulting firm of Park Jun Seo." Zuri read the alert twice. She thought about a voice on the phone, slightly uneven at the edges, telling her to be careful. "He called me from that building," she said. "Yes," Si-hyeok said. "Is he? I don't know yet. He was already typing. Daniel is finding out." Zuri stood in the middle of that 34th floor room with the Hudson going dark behind the windows and the news alert still on the table between them and the physical reality of her situation. The ankle, the file, the phone call, the fire. The insider who was still inside pressing down on her with the specific, unglamorous weight of a situation that has moved past the point where caution is still a real option. She could still leave. She told herself that she could call her attorney tonight, document what she put at arm's length from all of it, and let whatever happened next happen to other people. She believed herself for almost 30 seconds. Then Daniel appeared in the doorway again, and his face, for the first time, showed something not much, but enough. "The fire was set," he said. "Accelerant multiple points of origin. Professional." He paused. "Park Jun Seo is in the hospital. He's alive. He was in the building when it started and he made it out. But he's..." Daniel glanced at Si-hyeok. "He's not going to be talking to anyone tonight." Si-hyeok's jaw was tight. "Someone knows he called me," Zuri said. "Yes." "Which means someone is monitoring his communications." "Yes." "Which means they know he called me from your building." The three of them stood in the particular silence of people who have just understood, simultaneously, that the situation they are in has just sealed itself around them, and that the door they might have used to leave it has quietly, without announcement, swung shut. Si-hyeok looked at Zuri. "I can have you out of the city by morning," he said. "Somewhere safe with security, while I address this internally. It's a legitimate offer, and I mean it without any strings." Zuri looked at him. She thought about safe. She thought about what safe had cost her over the past several months, the ankle, the silence, The 34 floors, the practiced smile that everyone believed. No, she said. Si-hyeok waited. I'm not going anywhere, she said. And I'm not going to be managed. If this insider knows who I am, running doesn't make me safer, it just makes me easier to manage. She paused. I want to see the operational memo, the one authorizing the Grafton Avenue cancellation. Tonight, Si-hyeok studied her for a long moment. All right, he said quietly. And I want my attorney on the phone within the hour. Done. And Si-hyeok. She used his name without the honorific for the first time, and she felt him register it, whoever signed that memo, whatever name is on it. You tell me the truth. No filtering, no deciding what I can handle. She held his eyes. We're past that. He looked at her with the expression of a man who is recalibrating something in real time, adjusting his understanding of a person against the version he had constructed, finding the version in front of him more demanding and more solid than the construction had accounted for. Yes, he said. Daniel came back in with a single sheet of paper and set it on the table between them. Zuri looked at the name on the operational memo, authorizing the cancellation of the Grafton Avenue Rehabilitation Center project, dated 6 years and 3 months ago. And for the first time, since she had walked into this building 23 minutes late, with a practiced smile and a ruined ankle, she felt something she had not felt all afternoon, not fear, not pain, not determination, but something colder and more specific than any of those. The name on the memo was not Park Jun-seo's. It was the name of the man currently serving as the chief legal officer of Haydam Meridian Group, the man whose office was 4 doors down the hall, who had been in the conference room that afternoon, who had nodded along with Zuri's presentation, with the polite, attentive expression of someone who had absolutely nothing to hide. The name was Lim Byung-jun. Zuri said it out loud because saying it made it real, and she needed it to be real before she could think about what it meant. Lim Byung-jun. Si-hyeok was standing absolutely still on the other side of the table. The kind of still that isn't calm. That's the opposite of calm. That's a body using every available resource to prevent itself from doing something irreversible. His eyes were on the memo. His hands were at his sides. Daniel Yu stood near the door and looked at a point approximately 6 inches above everyone's heads and said nothing. Your chief legal officer, Zuri said. Yes. Who has been with the organization for how long? 14 years. Si-hyeok's voice was completely flat. He came on 2 years before the Grafton Avenue project was initiated. He was involved in the foundation structure from the beginning. And Park Jun-seo took the blame. Jun-seo redirected the funds. His signature is on the financial transfers, because Byung-jun told him to. And then Byung-jun sat in the background for 6 years while you suspected Jun-seo and watched Jun-seo and eventually reduced Jun-seo's access. Zuri stopped. And Byung-jun was there for all of that, watching you watch the wrong man. Si-hyeok picked up the memo. He held it in both hands and looked at it the way you look at something you want to be different and know isn't going to be. He was in the room when I confronted Jun-seo, he said quietly. 6 years ago. He sat at the table and he said nothing. The rain outside had stopped. The absence of it made the room feel larger and colder. Somewhere down the hall, a door opened and closed, and the footsteps that followed were measured and unhurried, and then silence again. Si-hyeok, Zuri said. He looked at her. Where is Byung-jun right now? He turned to Daniel without another word. Daniel already had his phone out. Lim Byung-jun had left the building at 4:47 p.m. That was 17 minutes after the news alert about the Hoboken fire had appeared on Si-hyeok's phone. Daniel pulled the building exit logs in under 3 minutes and put the timestamp on the table between them, with the particular expressionlessness of a man delivering information he finds personally significant but professionally inadmissible. He knew, Zuri said. The fire happened, and he knew what it meant, and he left. He may have caused it, Si-hyeok said, or had it caused. Same thing in practical terms. Zuri sat down finally, because her ankle had stopped being ignorable and had become a constant, grinding fact that was pulling focus she needed elsewhere. She sat and put both hands flat on her thighs and breathed deliberately and thought. The federal contacts Jun-seo mentioned, she said. If Byung-jun is your chief legal officer, he would have had direct exposure to any federal inquiries into Haydam Meridian. Everyone, for 14 years. So he knew what was investigated, what was dropped, what was buried, and why. He was sometimes the person doing the burying. Si-hyeok set the memo down. He handled federal liaison. That was his specific function within the legal structure. Which means he wasn't just protecting himself from the Grafton Avenue fraud. He was positioned to know every time every Jun-so tried to surface what happened, and he could intercept it at the legal level before it reached anyone with authority to act. Yes, that's not opportunism, Zuri said. That's architecture. He built himself into a position where he could surveil every threat to himself and eliminate it legally. She looked at Si-hyeok. How many other things has he buried? Not just Grafton Avenue. Si-hyeok's jaw tightened again. I don't know. You need to know tonight. I'm aware of that. Because if he has federal contacts and he knows Jun-so called me from this building, then there is a version of tonight where we become the problem he decides to eliminate. She kept her voice even. I'm not saying that to be dramatic. I'm saying it because you hired him for his ability to make legal problems disappear. And right now, I am a legal problem. The silence that followed had a specific texture, the texture of a man confronting the machinery he built being used against him. Daniel, Si-hyeok said. Already on it, Daniel said. He hadn't moved from near the door. His phone was in his hand. Byung-jun's building access card shows he returned to his office between 3 and 4. Before the news alert, he was in the building when you received the notification. He saw us together, Zuri said. The conference room has interior glass panels facing the corridor, Daniel said. Anyone walking past could see who was in the small meeting room. So he saw us together, knew Jun-so had made contact, and left as soon as the fire confirmed Jun-so was out of play. She looked at Si-hyeok. He's been watching this building today the same way we've been watching him. Except he started his watch 6 years before we started ours. Si-hyeok turned and walked to the window. He stood there with his back to the room, looking out at the dark water, and Zuri watched the set of his shoulders and understood that whatever was happening inside him right now was significant and private, and she was not going to rush it. She gave him 40 seconds. We need to decide what we're doing tonight, she said. Not tomorrow. Tonight. He turned around. Whatever had been in his expression at the window was gone, replaced by the particular focused blankness of a man who has made a decision and is now only thinking about execution. Daniel, I need Minji and the full financial audit team on a secure system, working through the night. I want 14 years of Byung-jun's legal decisions cross-referenced against every financial irregularity in Hatem Meridian's records. Every federal inquiry, every dropped investigation, every vendor contract he touched. Everything. He paused. And I want someone at the hospital with Jun-so. Quietly. Not obvious. Someone who can tell me when he's coherent enough to talk. Daniel nodded and left the room. Si-hyeok looked at Zuri. Your attorney. Call them now. Don't use this building's network. She was already reaching for her phone. Her attorney was a woman named Claire Odom, who had been practicing law in Newark for 26 years and had the voice of someone who had received bad news at inconvenient hours, so many times that inconvenience. And bad news had lost their power to change her tone. Zuri explained the situation in the efficient, stripped-down way she had learned to explain complicated problems to people who charged by the hour. Claire was quiet for a moment when she finished. The encrypted document Jun-so mentioned. Don't open it until I can set up a clean review environment. Can you have it forwarded to me directly? He said to keep it off Hatem Meridian's network. Send it to my personal encrypted address. I'll text it to you. A pause. Zuri, this is bigger than your ankle, I know. Are you safe right now? I think so. For tonight. I want you to document everything that happened today. Timestamps, names, exact quotes, where you can remember them. Do it on your own device. No cloud backup before you sleep. Send me a copy in the morning. Another pause, and I want you out of that building within the hour. Don't stay there overnight. I'm not planning to. Plan harder. Claire's voice was dry and flat and certain. These people, and I mean everyone in this situation. Not just the bad actors, these people operate in structures where individuals become variables. You are currently a variable. My job is to make you a person with documented rights and a clear legal identity that is distinct from whatever is about to happen in that organization. The faster we do that, the better." Zuri thanked her and hung up. Si-hyeok was watching her from across the room. "She's right," he said. "You should leave." "I heard her. I said I wasn't planning to stay." She pocketed her phone. "But I need something from you before I go." "Ask." "The original anonymous envelope. The one delivered to your legal department in May. Who received it?" Si-hyeok went very still. "Who was the recipient?" Zuri said again more slowly. "It went to the legal department. Who specifically signed for it?" The stillness lasted 2 full seconds too long. "It went through standard intake," he said. "Legal department reception. Who logged it?" "I would need to check." "Check." He reached for his phone. He made a call that lasted 30 seconds. When he put the phone down, the controlled expression was doing something at its edges that it had not done before, not cracking exactly, but stressing, the way a material stresses before it cracks. The micro-expressions of a structure under load it wasn't designed for. Byung-jun's assistant logged the intake, he said. Zuri absorbed that. So Byung-jun received the anonymous evidence package in May. He knew what it contained. He had 6 months to assess it, decide how to respond, and position himself. She paused. What did he do with it? Was it ever formally reviewed? It was flagged as an anonymous submission with insufficient provenance to trigger a formal internal investigation. He said it with the particular flatness of a man, hearing himself explain something that he is understanding as he speaks in a completely new way. That determination was made by the legal department, by Byung-jun, by his office. Yes. Zuri pressed 2 fingers against her temple. He got the envelope in May. He knew Jun-seo was moving. He used 6 months to figure out what Jun-seo's play was, who else was involved, how to counter it, and in the meantime, he let you proceed with the board meeting today because he needed to see how far the operation had gotten. He needed to know if you knew. She looked at Si-hyeok. He was in that conference room this afternoon, watching you watch me. And when the fire happened, and I didn't immediately, he understood that the operation had succeeded further than he could suppress. And he left. Si-hyeok turned and put both hands flat on the table and stood there with his head down for a moment, and Zuri recognized the posture of someone whose internal structure is reorganizing under pressure, where you have to hold still or you'll move wrong. He's had 14 years, Si-hyeok said very quietly. Inside everything. Inside the legal structure, the federal relationships, the board communications. Every major decision for 14 years has passed through his office. Yes. Which means I don't know what is real and what he shaped. No, Zuri said. You don't. The words landed between them without cruelty, just accuracy. And sometimes accuracy is its own kind of brutality. She left the building at 6:43 p.m. Daniel Yu walked her to a car, not a request, not a question, just a fact. The way Si-hyeok's security apparently operated, and the driver was a woman, which Zuri registered without comment and appreciated without saying so. She sat in the back seat as the car moved through Jersey City toward the Holland Tunnel, and she looked at her phone and typed for 22 minutes, documenting everything in the stripped, precise language she used for case notes, time, name, exact exchange, physical detail, inference clearly labeled as inference. Her ankle ached with a deep, rhythmic persistence. She kept her left foot elevated slightly against the seat in front of her. She thought about Constance Yeo. She thought about what it cost to spend the last years of your life trying to correct something that people with more power kept burying. She thought about filing a complaint and being dismissed. She thought about dying without having fixed it, and leaving behind a nephew who loved you enough to spend up her building something elaborate and imperfect and ethically complicated because he couldn't find a clean way, and he was not willing to let it stay broken. She thought about her own ankle and what she had been willing to do to herself to avoid asking for help. She thought about Lim Byung-jun in his office 4 doors down a hall, 14 years of maneuvering, watching, intercepting, a man who had made himself indispensable by making himself necessary to the suppression of everything that could undo him. Her phone buzzed. Si-hyeok. Jun-seo is stable. Burns on his hands and one arm. He'll be coherent by morning. I'll be at the hospital at 7 a.m. You don't have to be there. She read it twice. Then she typed back, I'll be there at 6:45. Pause. Then, bring your attorney. She put the phone down and looked at the tunnel lights, strobing past overhead, and thought, what kind of person does this make me? She had come into this day with a presentation and a swollen ankle and a strategy for getting funding for 2,400 patients who needed physical rehabilitation and couldn't pay for it. She was going home tonight with a legal identity protection document being drafted, an encrypted file from a man who was currently in a hospital burn unit, and a working knowledge of a 14-year corporate conspiracy that she had not chosen and could not unknow. She thought about calling someone. She had people she could call, a friend from graduate school, her program manager Denise, who would listen without judgment. She thought about what she would say. I think I'm inside something dangerous, and I don't entirely know how to get out of it, and I'm not sure I want to. She didn't call anyone. The Hoboken hospital smelled the way hospitals always smelled, antiseptic over something organic, the specific combination that your body learns to associate with crisis and waiting. Zuri arrived at 6:41, 4 minutes before Si-hyeok, and she spent those 4 minutes standing in the corridor outside the burn unit with Claire Odom, who had driven from Newark at an unreasonable hour, without complaint, and was wearing a coat she had clearly pulled on over what she'd been sleeping in. Tell me about Jun-seo, Claire said quietly. He's the one who built the trail that put me in Si-hyeok's building. He used your identity without consent. Yes. And now he's going to tell us who told him to redirect the funds 6 years ago, and why and who inside Si-hyeok's organization has been running interference since. That's the plan. Claire looked at her with the expression of someone who has lived long enough to know that plans are what you have before reality introduces itself. And Psych, do you trust him? Zuri thought about it seriously, which Claire noticed and seemed to appreciate. I trust that his interests and mine are currently aligned. I trust that he's an exceptionally observant man who doesn't waste words or movements. I trust that he is capable of making decisions that are genuinely difficult without flinching. She paused. I don't trust that I know everything he's thinking. That's a reasonable position, Claire said. Maintain it. Si-hyeok arrived with Daniel at 6:45 exactly. He looked like a man who had not slept, which Zuri suspected meant he had been awake all night, because Si-hyeok looked like someone who would wear sleeplessness, efficiently no visible deterioration. Just a slightly sharper quality to his attention, like the edges of him had been refined by the hours. He greeted Claire briefly and professionally, and then looked at Zuri. He's awake. The attending says we have 20 minutes before they want him to rest. 20 minutes is enough, Zuri said. Park Jun-se's looked smaller in a hospital bed. That was the first thing Zuri noticed, the way the room and the equipment and the IV and the bandages on his hands and right arm reduced a man to something more legible. His face was uninjured, and he was alert, in the careful way of someone managing pain, with the part of their brain that handles performance, the same part Zuri had been using on her ankle for 4 months. He looked at Si-hyeok first. Something passed between them, not hostility exactly, but the complicated residue of a relationship that had existed at close range for over a decade, and then curdled, the kind of regard that doesn't go clean even when it goes bad. Then Jun-seo looked at Zuri. You brought your lawyer, he said. His voice was slightly rough, not from emotion, but from smoke. Yes, Zuri said. Good. He shifted against the pillow. I would have done the same. Who set the fire? Si-hyeok said. Not sitting down. Standing at the foot of the bed with his hands at his sides and his voice at the temperature of deep water. Be Young Jun's people. I don't have direct proof, but I know his methods. Jun-seo's eyes moved back to Si-hyeok. He found out I called her. He had someone on my building's security system. He's had someone on a lot of things for a long time. How long have you known it was him? Si-hyeok said. That he was the one who instructed me? From the beginning. I knew it was him when I was doing it. He came to me directly, not through any documented channel. He said the Grafton Avenue project was creating operational complications in the South Ward, and that you had approved the redirection. A pause. He said you approved it. Si-hyeok's face did not move. I was 34, Jun-seo said. I believed him because he had no reason to lie to me, and because you and I were not our relationship was not one where I questioned your decisions through your staff. I moved the funds. He looked at his bandaged hands. 3 months later, I understood I'd been used. By then, the money was dispersed through enough structures that tracing it back cleanly would have implicated me at the first level. So you said nothing, Si-hyeok said. I said nothing for 6 years. I watched him. I documented what I could. I tried twice through legal channels to surface it, and both times it went nowhere because of him. As it turns out, though I didn't understand the mechanism until later. He paused. When his aunt died, he glanced at Zuri Marcus Yeo's aunt, Constance. When she died, I met with Marcus 6 months afterward. He came to me. He'd found documents in her things. Notes she'd kept. Records she'd preserved because she didn't trust the official system to preserve them. And together you built the operation that brought me to Si-hyeok's building, Zuri said. Yes. He looked at her steadily. I am sorry for what that required of your identity. I want you to understand that I understood it was wrong, and I did it anyway, and I'm not asking you to forgive me. I'm asking you to understand that there was no clean version. There's never a clean version, Claire said, from her position near the door. That's not a justification. No, Jun-seo agreed. It isn't. The federal contact, Si-hyeok said. Byung-jun, who does he have? Jun-seo was quiet for a moment. There's an agent in the New York field office. Has been there for 11 years. Byung-jun has financial leverage on him. I have documentation of 2 payments, significant ones, both routed through shell structures. The agent's name is in the encrypted document I sent Ms. Ashbourne. He looked at Zuri. Did you receive it? My attorney has it. Claire held up her phone. I have it. I haven't opened it yet. When you do, Jun-seo said, you'll find documentation of the 2 buried investigations, the payment records, and 1 additional item. He paused. Byung-jun has been preparing an exit for approximately 8 months. Moving assets, restructuring his personal holdings, establishing residency options. He knew something was eventually going to break. He's been getting ready to be somewhere else when it did. Si-hyeok's voice was very quiet. How far along is he? Based on what I could track close. Weeks, not months. Jun-seo looked at him. If you don't move on him now, with what you have, he walks. He takes whatever he can carry and he walks. And the federal contact makes the investigations go quiet again, and in 2 years it's as if none of this happened. He paused. Except Ms. Ashbourne's name is in record, she didn't put it in. And you're still sitting with an organization you don't fully understand anymore. The 20 minutes were almost splitting. The 20 minutes were almost up. A nurse appeared in the doorway and looked at them with the polite, immovable authority of some priority ranking was different from everyone in this room. Si-hyeok looked at Jun-seo. One more question. Jun-seo waited. Marcus Yeo, where is he now? Jun-seo's expression changed slightly. I don't know. He was supposed to contact me 2 days ago and didn't. After the fire, he stopped. I don't know where he is. They stood in the hospital corridor, outside the burn unit, and Zuri thought about Marcus. Scattered, enthusiastic Marcus, who was always behind on everything. Who had built a complicated, morally imperfect plan to force a wrong to be righted. Splitting. Because he had watched his aunt spend the last years of her life trying and failing through proper channels, and he had decided that proper channels were not going to be sufficient. Weeks, not months. She turned to Si-hyeok. Byung-jun knows the operation succeeded. He knows Jun-seo survived. He's going to accelerate. Yes, which means Marcus is exposed. If Byung-jun traced the operation back to its source the way we did, he may already be looking for Marcus. Si-hyeok was already reaching for his phone. The South Ward nonprofit, Zuri said. That's where Marcus works. Someone needs to... Daniel is already, I know the neighborhood, Zuri said sharply. I've been working there for 2 years. I know which buildings, which routes, which people Marcus would go to if he felt threatened. Your people don't. She looked at Si-hyeok with her jaw set and her ankle screaming and the full weight of a day she had not planned for pressing down on everything. I'm going with Daniel. Claire started to say something. Claire, please. Zuri looked at her, opened the encrypted file. Get the payment records to someone in the federal structure who isn't compromised. Start with the Inspector General's office, not the full office. And do it before noon. Can you do that? Claire held her gaze for a moment. Yes.
Yoke.
The internal audit, whatever your team found overnight, I need a summary on my phone within the hour. Names, amounts, dates. Byung-jun cannot be the only person in that building who knew. You'll have it. She turned and started walking down the corridor, and Daniel fell into step beside her, without being asked, and without saying anything, which she appreciated. Because the corridor was long, and her ankle was very bad, and she needed every available unit of concentration for moving forward. Her phone buzzed. An unknown number different from Jun Seo's, different from any number she recognized. She answered it. Silence for 2 seconds. Then a voice she had not heard before, male, young, breathing hard, the breath of someone who has been moving fast and stopped. Ms. Ashbourne, a pause. I'm Marcus. Marcus Yeo. I got your number from it. Doesn't matter. I need to tell you something before anything else happens. His voice was strained and rapid, and underneath it was something that sounded like guilt, the specific variety of guilt that belongs to someone who has done something they believed was right and is now confronting the cost. Where are you? She said. I'll tell you that in a second. But you need to hear this first. He stopped. She could hear him breathing. The plan. What I built with Jun Seo. It wasn't just about getting you and Si-hyeok in the same room. Something in his voice made her slow her pace. Marcus. There's a component you don't know about. A document I sent separately, not to Jun Seo, not to you, not to Si-hyeok's legal department. His breath was very uneven now. I sent it to a journalist. Investigative unit at a national outlet. 2 weeks ago. Zuri stopped walking. Daniel stopped beside her. The document has everything, Marcus said. Byung-jun's financial records, the federal contact, the fund diversion, the buried investigations. Everything. I had a pause. It also has Si-hyeok's name. Prominently. Because it's his foundation. It's his organization. The story the journalist is going to write is not going to be a story about a corrupt legal officer. It's going to be a story about Kwon Si-hyeok. His voice dropped. I thought that was the only way to make it stick. To make it public enough that Byung-jun couldn't bury it. But I didn't know then what I know now about what Si-hyeok is actually what he's actually been doing. With this, Zuri stood in the hospital corridor with fluorescent light overhead, and the smell of antiseptic in the back of her throat, and her ankle burning, and the understanding of what Marcus had just said moving through her like cold water rising. When does the story publish? She said. The journalist contacted me yesterday for comment. Standard pre-publication verification. A pause that lasted too long. Publication is scheduled for 72 hours from now. 72 hours. Si-hyeok's name prominently in a nationally published investigation. Before the internal audit was complete. Before Byung-jun was located. Before the federal inspector general had the payment records. Before any of the controlled structured dismantling that Si-hyeok had been preparing to do could be done. Everything they had spent the last 20 hours building the careful, methodical exposure, the legal protection. The internal reckoning was about to be overtaken by a news cycle that would flatten all of it into a single headline and then move on, leaving the collateral damage for everyone left standing to sort through, including Zuri, whose name was documented in those records, whose identity had been used in the operation, whose cooperation with Si-hyeok over the past 20 hours could be made to look from the outside like something other than what it was. She turned around and walked back towards Si-hyeok, who was still standing near the burn unit entrance where she had left him, his phone to his ear, and she could see from the set of his shoulders that he was managing something urgent, and she was about to make it more urgent, and there was no way to do that gently. Si-hyeok, she said. He looked at her and read her face and ended his call. She told him. She watched his expression as she talked, the same controlled surface, the same careful stillness, and then she watched what happened to it at the point where she said 72 hours, and what happened to it was the closest thing to panic she had seen on him, fast and specific and immediately suppressed, like a light switched on and off in a dark room, but she saw it. He stood there for a moment after she finished. He sent everything, Si-hyeok said. Everything he had.
Yes.
Including the federal contact's name. Yes. which means Byung-jun's contact, if he has any remaining access to that journalist communications. He'll know the story is coming, and he'll know what's in it. Zuri looked at him steadily. He may already know. Si-hyeok turned and put one hand flat against the wall and stood there with his head down and his eyes closed for 4 seconds. And in those 4 seconds, Zuri understood something she had not fully understood before, that the composed, unreachable surface she had been negotiating with since yesterday afternoon was not the absence of feeling, but the management of it. And that underneath the management was a man who had spent 6 years rebuilding his world on a foundation he thought was solid, and had just discovered it was sand. He lifted his head. "All right," he said. His voice was steady. "We have 72 hours to do what I was going to take 6 months to do." He looked at Zuri. "And I cannot do it without your help. Not your cooperation. Your active, documented, publicly visible help." He paused. "Which means I need to ask you something that I do not have the right to ask." Zuri looked at him. Her ankle was burning. Her attorney was down the corridor with an encrypted file and a phone call to make. Marcus Yeso was somewhere in the South Ward with a bad decision and the best intentions and the specific terrible courage of someone who loved someone who died without seeing justice done. "Ask," she said. "I need you to stand next to me when this breaks. Publicly, on record, as the person who identified the fraud independently and brought it to my attention." He met her eyes. "It's the truth. It's documentable, but it puts you in the center of something that will be very loud and very public and will cost you professionally and personally in ways I cannot fully predict." He waited. "And the rehabilitation center," she said. "I will fund it, independently through a clean structure, with no strings and no authority over its operation." "That's not what I mean." She kept her eyes on him. "The rehabilitation center. I stand next to you when this breaks, and my name is in the public record as the person who brought this forward. I lose the board relationships that fund the Renewal Foundation. My current partners pull back because they don't want the exposure. I lose the operating budget for an organization that serves 2,400 patients." She paused. "I'm not asking you to fix that. I'm telling you what the cost is, so you understand what you're actually asking me to give up." Si-hyeok absorbed that. "I understand," he said quietly. "Good," she held his gaze. "Now I'm going to tell you my answer." She breathed in through her nose, slow and deliberate, the same breath she had used at the podium the day before, when Darla Hewitt tried to make her feel like nothing. And she thought about Constance Yeo's handwriting in a brick building with boarded windows, 3 blocks from where she had volunteered on 2 Saturday mornings. And she thought about what it meant to have spent her entire career helping injured people rebuild their capacity to stand and walk and move through the world under their own power. She thought about 34 floors. "Yes," she said. The word dropped into the corridor between them, with the specific gravity of an irreversible thing. Si-hyeok looked at her, and what was on his face now was not relief. It was something more complicated than relief. Something that recognized the size of what she had just agreed to and did not minimize it, did not wrap it in gratitude or platitude, just looked at it clearly and held it. "Thank you," he said. "Don't thank me yet," Zuri said. "We have 72 hours and a legal officer who is currently somewhere with 14 years of knowledge about how to disappear." She reached for her phone. "Start with the audit. Whatever your team found overnight, I need it in 20 minutes. She turned back toward the corridor, and Daniel fell into step beside her again. And Claire was already calling her name from the far end of the hall, and Marcus was still on hold on her phone, breathing. The building they were about to begin dismantling was large and old, and had very deep foundations. 72 hours. She started moving, and she did not slow down for her ankle, and she did not think about slowing down. Because there are moments when the pain is just another fact about your situation, and you move through it the way you move through everything else, 1 floor at a time, forward, without stopping. 72 hours is a long time until it isn't. The first thing Zuri did when she got back to her apartment at 8:17 in the morning was take off her left shoe and look at her ankle. She had been avoiding that. The swelling had gotten worse overnight, the kind of worse that announces itself in color, the skin gone from its normal tone to something darker and angrier along the tendon line, the whole joint puffed in a way that said, Clearly and without ambiguity, that 4 months of strategic ignorance had produced a compounding debt that was now coming due. She sat on the edge of her bed and looked at it for 30 seconds, which was longer than she had allowed herself to look at it in weeks. And then she wrapped it in the compression bandage from the night before and put on a different shoe one with more support and a lower profile and stood up. She had 58 minutes before she needed to be back on a call with Claire. She used 40 of them to write. The document she produced was 11 pages, single-spaced, time-stamped at every entry. A sound like green wood splitting, it covered everything from the moment she had pushed through the 34th floor stairwell door the previous afternoon to the phone call with Marcus in the hospital corridor. Names, exact phrasing, her own inferences clearly labeled as inferences, the physical details of each room she had been in, the sequence of each disclosure. She wrote it the way she wrote clinical case notes, not for an audience, not for effect, but for the record. For the version of events that would exist independent of anyone's memory or motivation. She sent it to Claire's encrypted address at 9:01 and was on the phone at 9:02. The Inspector General's office, Claire said without preamble. I've made contact. They want the payment records and the name of the compromised agent by noon. Can we trust that channel? More than the field office. The IG operates independently. Byung-jun's contact is a field agent, not IG staff. That's the gap we're using. A pause. Si-hyeok's audit team. What do they have? Zuri's phone buzzed against her ear a second call. Si-hyeok, hold on. She switched over. Tell me. 14 years. His voice had the quality of someone who has been awake for a very long time and processed something very large. Byung-jun modified or suppressed documentation in 11 separate federal inquiries into Hatem Meridian. He has financial relationships with 6 vendors that were awarded contracts through a process he oversaw. And he has been transferring personal assets offshore for 8 months. A pause. My audit team also found something else. What? Constance Yeo's formal complaint, the one the board dismissed as insufficiently documented 6 years ago. His voice dropped slightly. Byung-jun wrote the board's response. He drafted the letter dismissing the complaint, circulated it for signature, and filed it. The board members who signed it believed they were ratifying a legal department assessment. He stopped. They never read the original complaint. The quiet on the line had weight to it. He buried it himself, Zuri said, while sitting in a meeting with you. Yes. She switched back to Claire and relayed the audit findings in 60 seconds. Claire was typing audibly on the other end, which meant she was already building the submission package. Noon is tight but manageable, Claire said. Get me the encrypted file content within the hour. You'll have it. Zuri hung up and stood in the middle of her apartment, with the morning light coming in at a low November angle and the city making its usual noise below, and the specific, pressurized awareness of someone who understands that the next 68 hours will determine several people's futures, including her own, and that there is no one else to hand this to. She put on her coat and went back out. Marcus Yeo was in a church basement in the South Ward. Not in any religious sense, the building had been deconsecrated and converted to a community center 12 years ago, and the space Marcus was using was a storage room off the main corridor that smelled of old cardboard and industrial cleaning solution. He was sitting on an overturned crate when Daniel and Zuri found him, his phone face down on the floor beside him, his jacket pulled up around his shoulders, the way people do when they're cold. But the cold isn't only about temperature. He was younger than she had expected. 28, maybe 29. He had his aunt's eyes. Zuri didn't know what Constance Yeo had looked like, but something in the quality of Marcus's attention, the way he held stillness, made her think of the handwriting on the foundation letter. Slanted and precise. He looked up when they came in, and the first thing he did was look at Zuri, not Daniel. I'm sorry, he said. I know, she said. That's not enough. No. She pulled a crate over and sat across from him, because standing over someone who's already down is something she'd never been able to do. But we can talk about sufficient later. Right now, I need to understand the journalist situation completely. He told her everything. The reporter's name was Adrian Marsh, investigative unit at a national paper, experienced with corporate corruption stories. Marcus had sent the document package 2 weeks ago through an encrypted channel, included a detailed explanatory memo, and had been in contact with Marsh twice since. The pre-publication verification call yesterday had confirmed a 72-hour publication window, barring a major development. "What counts as a major development?" Daniel said from the doorway. "If the subject is cooperating with law enforcement," Marcus said. "If there's an active federal investigation that would be compromised by publication." Marsh said she'd hold for a formal request from the IG's office. Zuri looked at Daniel. Daniel looked at Zuri. The math was immediate and obvious. "If Claire gets the submission to the IG by noon," Zuri said, "and the IG makes formal contact with Marsh by close of business today." "The story holds," Daniel said, "and we have the time to do this in the right order." She turned back to Marcus. "Which means the next 4 hours are what determines whether the story breaks in a way that burns everything, or in a way that actually fixes something." Marcus was looking at his hands. "I didn't think it through all the way." "You thought it through to the edge of what you had access to," Zuri said. "That's different." She waited until he looked up. "Your aunt's complaint. The board dismissal letter. Did she keep a copy of the original complaint? In her files?" "Yes. I have it. I need it." He reached into his jacket and produced a folded envelope, the paper soft with handling, and held it out. Zuri took it and didn't open it. "Not here. You need to not be alone today," she said. "Is there somewhere you can go that Byung-jun's people wouldn't know to look?" Marcus looked at her with the expression of someone who wants to argue about whether he needs protection and is smart enough to know it isn't the moment. "My cousin in Queens. Go there now." "Don't use your regular phone." Daniel produced a disposable from his jacket pocket and extended it with the expressionless efficiency of a man who carries disposable phones, the way other people carry pens. "Use this. Check in every 2 hours. My number is already in it." Marcus took the phone. He stood up, and his legs were stiff from the cold and the sitting, and he caught himself on the shelf beside him, and Zuri watched him find his footing. "Ms. Ashbourne," he said. She looked at him. "The center." "The Grafton Avenue building." He paused. "My aunt drew up the original patient intake process. It's in her files. All of it, the therapy protocols, the community outreach structure, the staffing rationale." He met her eyes. "She spent 18 months on it, before the project was killed." Zuri stood with that for a moment. "I'll read it," she said. "Promise." He nodded. He picked up his jacket. He left. At 11:43, Claire submitted the package to the Inspector General's office. At 12:08, Zuri's phone rang with a number she didn't recognize, and a voice she had also never heard that identified itself in the specific, compressed way of a federal official who has read something significant and is deciding how to respond to it. "Ms. Ashbourne, I'm going to ask you to come in today," she said. "This afternoon, if possible." She thought about her ankle. She thought about 67 hours. "I'll be there at 2. She called Si-hyeok. "The IG's office wants me this afternoon." "I know, they called my attorney 20 minutes ago." A pause. "Byung-jun hasn't been located. His apartment is empty. Building management says he had his car removed from the parking structure last night. He's running. He's preparing to run. There's a difference. If he were running, he'd be gone. He's still managing something. Clearing something." Another pause, and in it Zuri heard the specific texture of a man thinking through something he doesn't want to say. "My financial team found a secondary account structure this morning. Personal holding company, registered in Delaware with a single asset." He stopped. "Tell me." "The Grafton Avenue property." His voice was very controlled. "Byung-jun has a beneficial interest in the Grafton Avenue property, hidden behind 3 layers of shell company structure. If the rehabilitation center project had moved forwards 6 years ago, the acquisition would have cleared the title and his interest would have become visible. He wasn't protecting the organization's interests when he killed the project. He was protecting a personal real estate position." The silence between them lasted 4 seconds. "He killed a community rehabilitation center," Zurisa said, "to hide a real estate investment." "Yes. A man who has spent 14 years handling your organization's legal structure, who had access to the federal investigators looking at your operations." who dismissed a dying woman's formal complaint. Her voice didn't rise. It went in the opposite direction, quieter, flatter, the way her voice got when she was at the far end of something and could see it clearly. Because of a real estate investment. Yes, he breathed. Where does he think the property title sits now? It's complicated. The shell structure obscures the chain of ownership significantly enough that. Si-hyeok. She stopped him. Does he know that his interest in the property is visible to your audit team right now? Not unless someone told him. Then he doesn't know the reason for this whole thing, just became evidence in a federal submission. She paused. He thinks he's managing a corporate fraud exposure. He doesn't know it's also a real estate fraud exposure. A long beat. That is correct, Si-hyeok said. What does he still need to do before he can run? Clear the property interest. Transfer it cleanly, which requires either a legitimate sale transaction, or he stopped. Or a document, Zuri said. A legal document clearing his claim. Prepared and filed by someone with access to the property records. She stood up from the chair she'd been sitting in and felt her ankle catch and steadied herself against the wall. He needs a lawyer to do it, not his own name on it. He has relationships in the legal community, people who owe him. Another pause. If he can get that document filed before the federal submission reaches the property records level, then his real estate position disappears and he's just a corporate fraud case, which he can survive with the right representation and the federal contact buying him time. Yes, how long does a property record filing take to process? In New Jersey, if it's expedited through the right channels, same day. Zuri looked at her watch. 12:22. He's doing it right now, she said. The next call was to Claire, who confirmed in 45 seconds what Zuri had suspected. The IG submission would not reach the Property Records Division today. Federal submissions and municipal property filings operated in entirely separate bureaucratic lanes, and the IG package, thorough as it was, had been structured around financial and organizational fraud. The real estate angle had been included, but as supporting documentation, it would be weeks before anyone with authority acted on the property specifically. Zuri hung up and thought for exactly 90 seconds. Then she called Si-hyeok back. The property. What's the current listed owner of record? A shell company, Meridian Community Holdings, LLC, which is a Hedem Foundation subsidiary. Technically, which means you have the authority to initiate a title inquiry as the parent organization's chairman. A pause. Zuri, if you initiate a title inquiry today, it creates a formal hold on any transfer activity while the inquiry is pending. No filing goes through while a hold is active. She pressed on. It doesn't require federal involvement. It's a routine corporate action, a chairman reviewing an asset for organizational purposes. Completely legal, completely within your authority. It also alerts Byung-jun that we know about the property. He's already running. What does it cost us to let him know we're faster? The silence on the line was brief and specific. I'll have the inquiry filed within the hour, Si-hyeok said. Thank you, Zuri. His voice shifted slightly. Be careful this afternoon. The IG's office, they're not your allies. They want what you have. That's different from wanting what's good for you. I know. She pulled her coat on. I've been in rooms like that before. Not rooms like this. She thought about that. No, she admitted. Not exactly like this. She paused. But the principle is the same. Walk in, knowing what you're willing to give and what you're not. Don't fill silences that aren't yours to fill. And never say you're fine when you're not. A beat. Good advice, he said quietly. I've been practicing, she said and hung up. The IG's office was in Newark, which meant Zuri took a car across the river in early afternoon traffic and spent 40 minutes with her ankle elevated on the seat in front of her, reading Constance Yeo's original rehabilitation center complaint on her phone, the text photographed from a document that was 6 years old and had spent most of those years in a box in a dead woman's storage unit. It was thorough, 12 pages, meticulously sourced, laying out the fund diversion in clear, documented steps. Every transfer, every shell company, every date. Constance Yeo had been a careful woman, and she had understood that careful women with documented evidence still lose regularly. to men in positions of institutional authority. And she had made her document as airtight as a document can be made by someone working alone with limited access. And Byung-jun had taken that document, read it, understood exactly what it proved, and written a board dismissal letter that called it insufficiently documented. Zuri folded her phone and looked out the window at the city sliding past. She thought about what it cost to be right about something, and to have it dismissed anyway. She thought about what it did to a person over years, not the anger, but the specific, grinding erosion of the anger, the way it wore down into something quieter and more permanent. She had her own version of that erosion. She had been carrying it for a long time without looking at it directly. The IG's office had the institutional temperature of a room that had processed a great many difficult things and was not impressed by difficulty. The agent who met her, a woman named Torres, compact and direct, and wearing the expression of someone who has long since stopped performing patients, shook her hand and sat down and opened a folder without preamble. "We've reviewed the submission," Torres said. "We have questions." "I assumed you would," Zuri said. "Your cooperation with Kwon Si-hyeok over the last 20 hours. Walk me through your decision-making." It was not a hostile question. It was an assessment question, the kind designed to determine whether she was a witness or a participant. "I was presented with evidence that my identity had been used fraudulently," Zuri said. "I engaged with Si-hyeok to understand the nature and extent of that fraud, and because understanding it was necessary, to protect my own legal position. As that engagement produced additional information indicating active federal exposure, I contacted my attorney and facilitated proper disclosure." She paused. "At no point did I participate in, facilitate, or have prior knowledge of any illegal activity within Haydam Meridian or Kwon Si-hyeok's associated organizations." Torres looked at her. "You stayed in Si-hyeok's building for several hours last night, while my attorney coordinated with your office. You accompanied his security personnel to the hospital this morning to speak with Park Jun-so, whose testimony is material to the federal exposure you're now investigating, and the South Ward this morning, to locate Marcus Yeo, whose safety was relevant to the integrity of the information chain." She kept her voice level and her hands still. "Agent Torres, I understand what you're checking. You're checking whether I'm an instrument of Si-hyeok's organization or an independent witness. I am an independent witness. My attorney has documented that independence from the first hour of contact. My interest in this situation begins and ends with the fraudulent use of my identity, the protection of a public health initiative in serving 2,400 low-income patients, and the correct disclosure of criminal activity I encountered incidentally in the course of my professional work." Torres looked at her for a long moment. "You prepared for this conversation." "I prepare for every conversation," Zuri said. "That's not specific to you." Something shifted slightly at the corner of Torres's expression. Not a smile, an acknowledgement. "Tell me about Lim Byung-jun," Torres said. The meeting lasted 2 hours and 14 minutes. When Zuri came out of the building, Si-hyeok's car was at the curb, which she had not asked for and which she registered without comment, as the action of a man who understood that showing up without being asked is different from being asked and complying. She got in. The title hold went through, Si-hyeok said. He was sitting in the back seat, which she hadn't expected. She had expected Daniel in the driver's seat, a message relayed, the arrangement of someone managing at a distance. He was present and in person, and that told her something had changed in the last 2 hours. Bain Youngjun's attorney filed the transfer paperwork at 1:43. The hold stopped it at 1:49, 6 minutes. Yes. Where is he now? Si-hyeok's jaw was tight. Newark Airport. Terminal C. He purchased a ticket to Seoul 40 minutes ago, connecting through Frankfurt. Can the IG Torres has already contacted CBP? He won't board, he paused. But he knows he won't board, which means he's still in that airport, and he's making calls, and I don't know yet which of those calls will. His phone rang. He looked at it, and his expression contracted. What? Zuri said. It's Byung-jun, he said. They looked at each other. The car was stopped at a light. The driver was visible through the partition, eyes forward, steady. Sai answered. He put it on speaker. Si-hyeok. Byung-jun's voice was composed. Airport sounds in the background, PA systems, rolling luggage, the specific acoustic texture of a large transient space. I want you to know that I don't bear you any personal resentment. Si-hyeok said nothing. What I did was business. Every decision was business. You of all people should understand that. You dismissed Constance Yeo's complaint, Si-hyeok said. His voice was very quiet. You wrote the letter. You signed it. A pause. She was going to destabilize the organization. She was going to correct a wrong. Same thing sometimes. Byung-jun's breath was even. The woman you have with you, Ashbourne. She's sitting next to you right now, I'm guessing. I want her to understand something. She thinks she's doing, exposing corruption and fixing a broken sense, building something good in a bad space. It never works the way the person doing it thinks it will. The system is larger than the fix. It always was. Zuri leaned toward the phone. Constance Yeo understood that, she said. She did it anyway. A silence. She died, Byung-jun said. Yeah, Zuri said. She did. And her nephew spent a year building something complicated and imperfect because she died without seeing it fixed. And here we are, she paused. Here you are. Another silence, longer. I have documentation, Byung-jun said, and his voice had shifted, still composed, but differently composed, the composure of negotiation rather than declaration. Things about Si-hyeok's organization that go beyond the Grafton Avenue situation. Things I've accumulated over 14 years. I'm willing to discuss a structured disclosure in exchange. No, Si-hyeok said. No. He said it with a finality that foreclosed the conversation at its root. There is no structure. There is no exchange. You're going to talk to federal investigators, or you're going to not talk to federal investigators. Those are your options. I am not one of your options. A long beat. You're going to lose significantly, Byung-jun said. Whatever you think you're keeping, you won't keep it. I know that, Si-hyeok said. The line was quiet for 4 full seconds. Then Byung-jun hung up. Si-hyeok lowered the phone. He looked out the window at the street they were moving again, the city flowing past in its ordinary, indifferent way, the thousands of daily transactions of a city that didn't know and wouldn't care. He's still in the airport, Daniel said from the front seat. Let Torres know, Si-hyeok said. Daniel nodded and picked up his own phone. Zuri watched Si-hyeok. He had turned away from the window now and was looking at the back of the seat in front of him with the expression of a man counting the cost of what he just did not regret, but accounting. The kind of accounting that happens when you have just permanently closed a door. He was right about one thing, Zuri said. Si-hyeok looked at her. You're going to lose significantly. She kept her voice even. The investigation opens up everything, not just Byung-jun. The federal inquiries he suppressed, they reopen. Your organization's structure, the operations that existed in that gray space. She paused. The things that made people fear your name. Yes, he said. And you already know that. I've known it since last night. He looked at her. Since you said yes in that hospital corridor. That was the moment it became real. When I said yes, because it changed what I was doing from a private reckoning to a public one. He paused. A private reckoning you can control the shape of. Public one, he gestured at the window, belongs to everyone. Zuri thought about that. About the difference between the version of something you manage internally and the version that becomes part of the record. About what it meant to make a thing irreversible. She understood it in her bones. Her phone buzzed. Claire, Byung-jun is in CBP custody, Claire said. 20 minutes ago, they held him at the gate. Zuri exhaled. One clean, deliberate breath. The IG's is moving quickly, Claire continued. They'll want Si-hyeok's formal cooperation agreement in writing by tomorrow morning. And Zuri Adrian Marsh called me, the journalist. She's aware of the IG's formal hold on the story. She wants a comment from you directly. What kind of comment? The kind that shapes how you appear in the story. Right now you're in the documents as an identity theft victim who cooperated with federal authorities. That's accurate, but it's incomplete. A pause. She can tell a different version. One where you're the person who identified the fraud independently and brought it forward. One where the Renewal Foundations And what you're trying to build is part of the story, not just the background. That's the version Si-hyeok asked me to support. Yes. And it's also the version that's true. Claire's voice was steady. I want you to think about what you want your name to mean after this. Because it's going to mean something. The question is what? Zuri looked out the window. The south ward was visible from the highway. Now she could see the water tower that marked the neighborhood's northern edge, the roofline of the community buildings, the grid of streets she had driven through on 2 Saturday mornings without understanding what she was 3 blocks away from. I'll talk to her, Zuri said. Tonight. She hung up and turned to Si-hyeok. The journalist wants a comment from me. I'm going to give her one. She looked at him directly. I'm going to tell her the full truth, including that you've been cooperating voluntarily with the federal investigation and that you initiated the Grafton Avenue project in good faith before it was sabotaged internally. Si-hyeok held her gaze. That will not make the story less difficult for me. No, it won't. But it'll be accurate. And accurate is what protects you long-term better than any other frame. She paused. I'm also going to tell her about the rehabilitation center. What it was supposed to be. What Constance Yeo designed. What it could still be. Something shifted on his face. Because that's the part of the story that matters. Beyond the next news cycle, she said. The fraud and the corruption, that's the part that gets clicks. But the center is the part that means something. The car was pulling up outside the Hayden Meridian building. The afternoon light had gone gray and thin, and the building's facade was catching what was left of it in dull, flat planes. Si-hyeok's phone buzzed. He looked at it. His expression shifted, not alarmed, but sharpened, the specific sharpening of someone receiving information they had been waiting for and were not sure they were ready for. What? Zuri said. He turned the phone toward her. It was a message from his audit team. A single line. Found additional account linked to BWJ property structure. Beneficiary secondary party. Name attached. He tapped through to the attached file. The secondary beneficiary on Byung-jun's hidden property interest was not a company name. It was a person. A person whose name Zuri recognized not from Hayden Meridian, not from the past 24 hours, but from the city's public records, from grant applications, from funding committee lists she had reviewed in the course of preparing her own proposal. Darla Hewitt. Councilwoman Darla Hewitt, who had sat at the conference table the previous afternoon and called Zuri's proposal a feel-good project and questioned her commitment and reduced 12 years of professional work to a wave of her hand, had a financial interest in the property where the rehabilitation center was supposed to be built. Zuri looked at the name on the screen. She thought about the wave of Hewitt's hand. Your people. She thought about 34 floors. She handed the phone back to Si-hyeok, and her hand was perfectly steady. How deep does this go? She said. Si-hyeok looked at the screen. His voice, when he answered, was very quiet. I don't know yet. Then we find out tonight, she said. All of it. She pushed the car door open and got out, and the cold air hit her, and her ankle hit the pavement, and the pain was immediate and sharp and real, and she took it and stood up straight and looked at the building in front of her, the 34 floors of it, reaching up into the gray November sky. She had climbed it once on a broken ankle because she would not ask for help. She had no intention of doing that again. But she was going back in, and she was going to stay until they had every name and every number and every buried decision that had kept that community center dark for 6 years, and then she was going to do something about it. She waited for Si-hyeok to come around the car, and when he reached her, she looked at him and said, Hewitt is on that committee. I know. The same committee that reviews affordable healthcare funding proposals in this city. I know. Which means every proposal I've submitted in the last 4 years has crossed her desk while she had a financial interest in the property my work was supposed to be an alternative to. Si-hyeok looked at her with an expression that was the closest thing to anger she had seen from him, not at her, but at the specific mundane brutality of what had just become clear. Yes, he said. Zuri breathed once. Then let's go get all of it, she said, and pushed through the door into the building, and Si-hyeok came in behind her, and the lobby closed around them both with its neutral, expensive air. And above them, 34 floors of everything they still had to do waited in the dark. The audit team worked through the night on the 32nd floor. Si-hyeok had commandeered the space at 7 p.m., cleared out the regular staff, brought in his own financial forensics team, a woman named Minji who ran the operation with the quiet, relentless efficiency of someone who had been waiting for permission to do exactly this for a long time. 6 people around 2 long tables covered in laptops and printed ledgers and coffee cups that got replaced without ceremony whenever they went cold. Daniel moved between the door and the tables with the steady rhythm of a man whose job is to keep the room functional so the people inside it can think. Zuri sat at the far end of the left table and worked through Constance Yeo's files. Marcus had sent them electronically from his cousin's apartment in Queens the full archive, everything his aunt had preserved. Patient intake protocols, staffing frameworks, community partnership agreements that had been negotiated and then abandoned, a floor plan of the Grafton Avenue building, with handwritten annotations in the margins therapy room here, natural light critical, waiting area must not feel clinical. This hallway width allows wheelchair passage without crowding. 18 months of work. The kind of work that only gets done by someone who has thought carefully about what it means to be a patient, not a case, not a demographic, not a line in a funding proposal, but a person who comes through a door hurting and needs to leave feeling like they still have agency over their own body. Zuri read all of it. She read it slowly, which was not her usual speed, but the material demanded it. Demanded that she understand not just what the center was supposed to be, but why it had been designed the way it had, the specific considered choices behind every structural decision, the philosophy embedded in the spacing of rooms and the sequencing of services, and the language of the intake form that never used the word patient without also using the word partner. At 9:47, Minji put a printed summary on the table in front of Si-hyeok and said, "Hewitt." Si-hyeok looked at it. Zuri looked at him looking at it. Darla Hewitt had been a beneficial owner of the secondary shell company holding Byung-jun's interest in the Grafton Avenue property for 9 years. Stound green wood splitting. The financial relationship predated her city council seat. By 2 years, she had been a private real estate attorney before entering politics, and the shell structure had been established during that period, constructed by Byung-jun's legal office, with the kind of layered, plausible deniability architecture that took significant expertise to build and significant courage to unpick. The property had appreciated considerably in 9 years. Hewitt's beneficial interest, if the title had transferred cleanly, would have produced a return of roughly $800,000 on an initial position of $40,000. $800,000. That was the price of a community rehabilitation center that had never opened. She's been on the city's Affordable Healthcare Funding Committee for 6 years, Zuri said. She said it without emotion, because the emotion was there, but it was too large to put in her voice without it breaking. Every proposal I submitted, every funding cycle. Yes, Si-hyeok said. She voted against the Renewal Foundation's grant application 2 years running. I know, and yesterday she sat in that room and Zuri stopped. She put her hands flat on the table and breathed through it. The thing she was feeling was not grief exactly, and not rage exactly. It was something underneath both of those, something older and more specific. The feeling of understanding that a playing field you had always known was uneven was also rigged in ways you had not fully measured. She had known, in the general way that people who do her kind of work know, that the systems were imperfect and the gatekeepers were self-interested and the money never flowed as cleanly as the grant applications pretended. She had built her entire professional strategy around working within that knowledge, being more prepared than anyone else, more documented, more careful, giving them nothing to dismiss. She had climbed the stairs when the elevator was broken, because she would not give them the opening. And Darla Hewitt had been sitting in that room with a financial stake in the outcome, voting on her funding applications, waving her hand. Where is she now? Zuri said. Home. Her attorneys were contacted by the IJ's office at 8 p.m. Si-hyeok set the summary down. She's cooperating, according to the initial report, which probably means she's calculating what she can give up to protect what she can't afford to lose. Can she protect herself? I don't No. The financial relationship is documented clearly. The question is whether the prosecution can establish that the funding committee votes were directly motivated by the property interest. He paused. It's not a simple case, but it's a real one. Yes, it's a real one. Zuri sat with that. The fluorescent light overhead was the particular shade of relentless that only exists in rooms where people are working too late. And she was tired in a way that went below the physical, the kind of tired that accumulates when you have been running on the knowledge that stopping is not an option. And then, the thing that made stopping not an option suddenly resolves enough that you can feel the weight of everything you've been holding. Her ankle had gone past hurting and entered a kind of numb persistence. She had stopped registering it the way you stop registering a sound that's been present for too long. She would deal with it. She would deal with it when there was space to deal with it. Minji, Si-hyeok said. Minji looked up. Is there anything else tonight that requires my decision? Minji glanced at the table. The Federal Cooperation Agreement draft goes to your attorneys at 7 a.m. Everything we have is packaged and ready for that transmission. Tonight is just verification. She paused. You can stop, Si-hyeok. He looked at the room, the 6 people at the tables. Coffee cups, the printed ledgers, 14 years of decisions laid out in paper and light. Tomorrow, he said. He looked at Zuri. Come on. They ended up in a diner 3 blocks from the building because it was the nearest place open at 11 p.m. that wasn't a bar. A booth near the window, red vinyl, a laminated menu neither of them looked at. A server who brought coffee without asking, a professional assessed the situation with the professional neutrality of someone who had seen many kinds of late night and many kinds of people and assigned no particular judgment to any of them. Zuri wrapped both hands around the coffee mug. Si-hyeok sat across from her with his jacket over the back of the seat and his tie loosened and the composed surface reduced by 26 hours of sustained pressure to something rawer and more legible. They didn't talk for a few minutes. It wasn't an uncomfortable silence. It was the silence of 2 people who have been moving very fast and have briefly stopped and need a moment to locate themselves in the stillness. The journalist, Si-hyeok said finally, Marsh, did you speak with her tonight? An hour before we came down here. 40 minutes on the record. Zuri looked at her coffee. I told her the complete version. From the presentation yesterday through tonight. My attorney was on the call. How did she receive it? Professionally. She's good at her job. She listened without directing, and she asked follow-up questions that were specific and sourced, not leading. Zuri paused. The story she's going to write is not going to be comfortable. No. Your name is going to be prominent. The history of the organization, the operations that existed outside the legal framework that's going to be in the story. Not as the central focus, but as context. She looked at him directly. I was honest with her about the nature of what Hayden Meridian was. I didn't editorialize. I gave her what I knew, and she'll do what she does with it. Si-hyeok turned his coffee cup in a slow half circle. That's what I asked you to do. I know. I'm telling you so, there are no surprises. He nodded. When does it publish? She's holding for the IG's formal clearance. Probably 48 hours. Zuri paused. She's going to include the rehabilitation center. The original project, Constance Yeo, what it was supposed to be. Another pause. And what it could still be. Si-hyeok looked at her. I told her it was going to open, Zuri said. I told her as a fact, not a plan. Something shifted on his face. Not surprise, he was past surprise at what she said. Something more like the feeling of an anchor catching. Did you mean it? I don't say things I don't mean. She looked at him steadily. The question is how. The Renewal Foundation's current funding base is going to take damage when this story publishes. Some partners will pull back. Some funders will distance themselves from anything connected to the situation, and the ones who stay will need reassurance. That's a 6-month recovery process, minimum. She wrapped her hands tighter around the mug. The Grafton Avenue property needs to be transferred to a clean, independent structure with transparent governance and no beneficial interests hiding in the title chain. That's a legal process. Probably 4 to 6 months. Parallel tracks, Si-hyeok said. Yes, I can accelerate the legal process. The property transfer can be structured as a foundation donation to an independent community trust. No financial benefit to Hatem Meridian or any associated entity. Clean title, publicly recorded. He paused. I have the legal team to do it correctly and quickly, if that's what we decide. Not we, Zuri said. The community trust decides. I would recommend its governance structure include neighborhood association representatives, former patients from programs like the Renewal Foundation, and an independent financial oversight board. Si-hyeok is not on that board. He looked at her. I'm aware of that. I want to be sure. You've been sure of it since yesterday afternoon, he said. I understood it then. I understand it now. He paused. What I would like, and this is a request, not an assumption, is to be the person who funds the renovation. Directly, cleanly, through a documented charitable contribution with full public disclosure. No strings, no naming rights, no seat at any table. He looked at his coffee. The money that was supposed to build it 6 years ago existed. It was diverted and dispersed, and recovering all of it will take time. But the amount I can put in now, from my own resources, is sufficient to begin construction. Zuri looked at him for a long time. Why? She said. He seemed to consider whether to give her the managed answer or the real one. She had made it clear enough times that she could distinguish between the two that he opted for the real one. Because Constance Yeoh spent the last years of her life trying to fix what my organization broke, and she died without seeing it fixed. And her nephew spent a year risking everything legally, personally, to force the fix to happen. And the only thing I can do that is commensurate with that is to make the thing exist. He paused. And because you climbed 34 floors on a broken ankle and walked into a room full of people and delivered a brilliant proposal, and Darla Hewitt sat across from you with a financial stake in your failure and waved her hand at you. His voice was very quiet. That is not a debt I can ignore. Zuri was quiet for a moment. You understand that accepting your money for the renovation creates a perception problem, she said. Even with full disclosure, there will be people who look at the Ashbourne Center and see Si-hyeok's money in the foundation and question the independence of the operation. I know. I'm going to have to address that publicly. Repeatedly. I know that too. And I'm still going to run it the way I would run it regardless. If you're having a bad month in the press, the center doesn't make a statement on your behalf. If your legal situation produces new developments, the center doesn't comment. If someone on the community board decides they don't want any association with Hatem Meridian's history, I support their position. Yes, he said, without hesitation. You're agreeing to that very quickly. Because it's right. He looked at her. And because I'm trying to do this correctly. I understand that correctly means not having control. Zuri looked at the window. The street outside was nearly empty. A single car passed, headlights blurring in the residual wet of the pavement. The name, she said, yours to decide. I want it named for Constance Yeoh. Si-hyeok was still for a moment. The Constance Yeoh Center for Mobility and Recovery. Yes. He said nothing for a moment. When he spoke, his voice had the particular someone pushing through something that doesn't have a clean external expression. She would have been a good director. She was, Zuri said. In the design. She put 18 months of herself into what the center was supposed to be, and it's all documented, and I'm going to build it the way she designed it. She paused. It's the only thing I can offer her. Lim Byung-jun was formally charged 11 days later. The charges included wire fraud, obstruction of a federal investigation, bribery of a federal officer, and conspiracy to commit real estate fraud. His attorney entered a not guilty plea, with the practiced efficiency of a man prepared for the battle, and the federal case was assigned to a judge known within the legal community for running a tight courtroom with minimal tolerance for delay tactics. A compromised federal agent whose name appeared in the encrypted document exactly as Jun Se-oh had indicated resigned from the field office and was subsequently charged separately. The resignation was announced in a 3-sentence press release that the field office clearly hoped would receive minimal attention. It received considerable attention. Darla Hewitt resigned from the city council 9 days after the IG's investigation became public. Her resignation statement cited personal reasons. Her attorney indicated that she was cooperating with investigators and had no further comment. Splitting. The Affordable Healthcare Funding Committee was immediately restructured under interim leadership, and an independent review of the previous 6 years of grant decisions was initiated by the City Comptroller's Office. The Adrian Marsh story published on a Thursday morning. Zuri read it at her kitchen table before 6 a.m., still in the clothes she'd slept in, coffee going cold at her elbow. It was thorough and carefully sourced and relentlessly accurate, and it was not comfortable, which was what she had expected. Si-hyeok's name was prominent. The history of Haida Meridian's operations was present as context, handled with the particular precision of a journalist who understood the difference between what could be proven and what could be alleged. The Grafton Avenue project was in the story from its origin, through its sabotage, through its potential revival. Constance Yeo was in the story. Marcus was in the story, identified as a source who had cooperated with federal investigators. Zuri was in the story as the person who had identified the fraud and facilitated disclosure. She was also, in the story's final 3 paragraphs, the future director of the Constance Yeo Center for Mobility and Recovery, quoted on the record as describing the center's intended patient population, its programmatic design, governance structure, and its expected opening date. She read those 3 paragraphs twice. Then she called Marcus. He answered on the second ring. "I read it," he said. "I know. The part about my aunt." His voice was careful, the carefulness of someone managing something that could get away from them if they're not precise. The way she described her, it was right. "Yes," Zuri said. A pause. "I'm sorry," he said. "Again. For what I did with your identity. For building a plan that put you in the middle of something without your consent. I know you are. That also isn't enough." "No," Zuri agreed. "But you already know that the Constance Yeo Center is looking for a community outreach coordinator. Someone who knows the South Ward. Someone who understands why the design is the way it is." She paused. "The position pays a real salary. It has benefits. It would start when the renovation is complete." The silence on Marcus's end lasted a long time. "You don't have to do that," he said. "I know I don't have to," she said. "Your aunt designed something worth building correctly. You made sure I found out about it. That's worth something to me." A pause. "Think about it. You don't have to answer today." She hung up and sat with her cold coffee and the morning light coming in through the kitchen window and the story still open on her laptop, and she thought about 34 floors, and she let herself feel, for just a moment, the specific and unguarded weight of everything the last 11 days had cost her. The Renewal Foundation had lost 2 institutional partners in the week following the story's publication. A third had placed its relationship under review. The operating budget for the coming year had a gap that was real and significant and would require 6 months of intensive fundraising and relationship repair to close. She had 3 grant applications outstanding whose outcomes were now uncertain. She had also received 14 new inquiries from funders she had never worked with, several of whom had read the story and tracked down the Renewal Foundation's website specifically because of it. The math was not clean. It was never going to be clean. She had known that when she said yes in the hospital corridor. She closed the laptop. She had an orthopedic appointment at 9 a.m. The orthopedist was a direct, unhurried woman named Dr. Patel, who looked at the imaging with the expression of someone examining something that did not surprise her, but that she wanted to be accurate about before speaking. "Grade 3 sprain with ligament laxity," she said. "You have some chronic inflammation in the tendon that's been there long enough to be structural, not situational." She looked up. "You've been walking on this for 4 months." "Yes." "Doing what?" Zuri thought about it. "Regular work." "Some stair climbing." Dr. Patel looked at her with the particular expression that physicians develop for patients who describe serious physical activity with deliberate vagueness. "The good news is that surgery isn't indicated. The bad news is that you're looking at a real rehabilitation process, not a few weeks of rest, an actual process. Physical therapy 3 times a week for 8 to 12 weeks. Structured rest protocols, possibly a boot for the first 4 weeks." She paused. "If you follow the protocol, full function is very likely. If you continue to walk on it without treatment, you risk permanent instability." I understand, do you, Dr. Patel said, not unkindly, just with the precision of someone who has heard that phrase before. I understand better than I did 4 months ago, Zuri said. Dr. Patel held her gaze for a moment, then seemed to decide that was sufficient. I'm going to refer you to a physical therapist, someone who works with athletes and people in high-demand occupations. She's good. She wrote something on a prescription pad. The boot goes on today. Si-hyeok's formal cooperation agreement with the federal investigations was filed on a Wednesday 16 days after Zuri's presentation in the 34th floor conference room. The agreement required full disclosure of Hatem Meridian's operational history, including the activities that existed in the gray space between legitimate shipping logistics and the organizational structure that had given Si-hyeok his particular kind of authority for 2 decades. It required the dismantling of those structures within a specified timeline. It required cooperation with ongoing federal inquiries into connected organizations. It required significant financial restitution. It was, in legal terms, a substantial cooperation agreement. The kind that reflects what the federal investigators understood, that dismantling a complex organization correctly, with cooperation, produces better outcomes than pursuing it through pure adversarial process. The kind that costs the cooperating party enormously and gives them, in exchange, the ability to remain operational legally, legitimately, reduced rather than being consumed entirely. Si-hyeok signed it on a Wednesday morning in a federal building in Newark, with his attorneys beside him, and Daniel Yu standing near the back of the room with his hands at his sides and his expression showing nothing, as usual, except that Zuri had come to understand that Daniel's nothing was a specific something, a loyalty that was not performative and not contractual but personal, the kind that stays when the power diminishes because it was never about the power. Zuri was not in the room. She was in physical therapy, 3 blocks away, relearning how to put weight on her left foot correctly. Her therapist, whose name was Keisha and who had the cheerful, implacable energy of someone who finds genuine satisfaction in watching people recover, had her standing on a balance board while she demonstrated the correct distribution of weight across the ankle joint. You've been compensating, Keisha said, for months. Your right side has been overloaded. Your hip is carrying strain that's going to show up as a problem later if we don't address the underlying pattern. What's the underlying pattern? Zuri said. She was concentrating on the board. It was harder than it looked. You don't trust the left side to hold you. Keisha made an adjustment to her stance. So you put everything on the right and the left just goes along for the ride. Eventually, that creates its own damage. She stepped back. You have to let the left side do its work. That's the whole point. Zuri thought about that in a way that was probably more than the physical therapist intended. She let the left side do its work. She held the balance board, and the ankle shook slightly with the effort, and she didn't shift away from it. The property transfer for the Grafton Avenue building was completed on a Friday afternoon in late January, 7 weeks after the story published. The legal documentation ran to 42 pages. The community trust that received the title had a 7-member governance board, 2 neighborhood association representatives from the South Ward, 1 former patient of a comparable program in Newark, 1 independent financial overseer with no prior Hatem Meridian affiliation, 1 architect who had been recommended by a community development organization and who had reviewed Constance Yu's original floor plan annotations with the particular attention of someone who understood what they were looking at, 1 attorney serving as the board's legal counsel, and Zuri. The transfer was documented in a public filing, reported in the local press, in a story that was much smaller than Adrian Marsh's piece and much more specific, a sound like green splitting, and that several hundred South Ward residents read on a Thursday morning and shared among themselves with the quiet attention of people who have been waiting a long time to see something acknowledged. Si-hyeok was not at the filing. He had provided the funding through a documented charitable contribution processed through a clean, independent accounting firm with full public disclosure as he had agreed, and then he had stepped back and stayed there. Zuri received a text from him the afternoon the transfer was filed. Confirmed. That was all it said, she replied. Thank you. Pause. Then, You'll send me the opening date when you have it. Yes, she replied. You'll come. Yes, he replied. Park Jun-so testified before the federal grand jury in February. He testified for 2 days. His testimony covered the original fund diversion in complete detail, Byung-jun's instruction and his own compliance, the years of watching and documenting that followed, the 2 failed attempts to surface the fraud through legal channels, and the construction of the operation that had brought Zuri into the situation. He had discussed the identity use with Zuri's attorney before testifying. The conversation was not easy and not short, and it did not end with forgiveness, which Jun-so had not asked for. What it ended with was a clear, documented statement from Zuri's attorney, establishing the nature of the harm, and Jun-seo's acknowledgement of it, entered into the federal record. It was not sufficient. It was what existed. The burns on Jun-seo's hands and arm healed over the following months, imperfectly. He would carry scarring. He had told Zuri, in the one direct conversation they had after his hospital discharge, that he understood the scars were a reasonable thing to carry. She had not disagreed. Byung-jun's trial was scheduled for the following autumn. His attorneys had filed 7 preliminary motions, all of which were denied. The judge's patience for delay tactics was, as the legal community had anticipated, extremely limited. Darla Hewitt entered a guilty plea in March. The plea covered a reduced set of charges in exchange for full cooperation and restitution. The restitution amount was significant and public. The statement she released through her attorney was 3 sentences long and contained the word regret twice, which her attorney had clearly selected over stronger language. Zuri read it and thought about the wave of a hand, and did not find the statement sufficient, and knew she was not going to find it sufficient, and let that be what it was. Insufficiency is not the same as the end of a thing. The renovation of the Grafton Avenue building took 8 months. The architect the community trust had selected, a woman named Asha who had grown up 6 blocks from the property and had a professional history that included 3 similar community rehabilitation spaces in other cities, worked from Constance. Yeo's annotations as her primary reference document. She told the trust board at their first meeting that the annotations were the most specific and thoughtful preliminary design guidance she had encountered in her career, and she said it with the direct, technical confidence of someone who had encountered a great deal of preliminary design guidance and was not given to overstatement. The construction was not smooth. There was a materials delay in the 4th month that pushed the timeline by 3 weeks. A subcontractor dispute in the 6th month that required the trust board's intervention and a contract renegotiation, and 48 hours of work by the board's attorney that nobody had budgeted for. A discovery of structural issues in the East Wing that added cost and required Asha to redesign 3 rooms from their original configuration. It was imperfect and expensive and real. In the final 2 months before opening, Zuri spent 3 days a week in the building, walking the spaces as they were completed, understanding the flow of the rooms, sitting in the therapy areas at different times of day to understand the light, which Constance Yeo had noted was critical in her margin annotations, and which Asha had worked very hard to get right. Her ankle was 60% recovered by the time the renovation was halfway done. By the time the building was ready, it was 85. Dr. Patel had been precise about the timeline and precise about the work required, and Zuri had followed the protocol with the same discipline she applied to everything else, which meant she had also learned, gradually and with considerable effort, to say when she needed to rest, and to actually rest when she said it. Keisha had been pleased with her progress. Keisha had also told her, in the blunt, good-humored way that characterized all their sessions, that 85% was not 100%. A sound and that 100% would require the continued discipline that Zuri had spent 4 months pretending she didn't need before she started applying it. You're good at the work, Keisha had said. You're still learning to let the work be enough for one day. Zuri had not argued with her. The Constance Yeo Center for Mobility and Recovery opened on a Thursday in October. The morning was clear and cold, the kind of October morning that has forgotten it's allowed to be warm, and the sky over Newark was the particular high, clean blue that only appears after several days of rain have washed the air. The building's facade had been restored, not made new, but made honest. The brick cleaned and repointed, the windows replaced with high-efficiency glass that let in the morning light in wide, steady planes. There were no boarded windows. The hallways inside smelled of fresh paint and wood, and the faint medicinal undertone of equipment that had been cleaned and calibrated and set in place, and was waiting to be used. The therapy rooms were exactly what Constance Si-hyeok had described in her annotations: bright, spacious, oriented toward natural light, arranged to make the work of recovery feel like work worth doing rather than like confinement. Children walked between parallel bars in one room, their concentration fierce and their movements incremental and completely earnest. In another room, an elderly woman worked with a therapist on regaining the pattern of her gait after a hip replacement, the two of them moving slowly down a padded corridor with the steady, patient rhythm of people who understand that this is not a race. In the intake area, which Constance Si-hyeok had designed with particular care, because she had understood that the intake experience was the patient's first data point about whether this place was different from every other place that had made them feel like a file. Marcus Si-hyeok sat at the coordinator's desk and spoke with a sound like green wood splitting. Man who had come through the door alone and uncertain. Marcus spoke to him with the unhurried attention of someone who has learned from people who understood that the door was the hardest part. Zuri walked through the building in the hour before the ceremony. She walked slowly, not because her ankle required it, but because the building deserved it. She stopped in each room and stood in the light and let herself look at it, without an agenda, without the next task already assembled in her mind. She had worked very hard to build this thing, and the work was not finished. It was never going to be finished. That was the nature of it. But the building existed. The rooms were real. The equipment was real. People who would come through the door starting today were real. She stood in Constance Si-hyeok's intake area and looked at the name on the wall, the Constance Si-hyeok Center for Mobility and Recovery. And she thought about 18 months of annotated floor plans in a box in a storage unit. And she thought about a woman who did not live to see the things she had designed. And she let herself feel that fully, the specific grief of a thing that came too late for the person it most honored. And she did not push the feeling away, or manage it, or file it somewhere more convenient. She let it be what it was. Then she put on her coat and went outside to stand in the October light and wait for the ceremony to begin. Si-hyeok arrived without announcement, which she had expected. He came in a car, not a Hatem Meridian car, because Hatem Meridian, restructured and reduced and operating under federal oversight, did not run the kind of cars it used to run. A regular car, dark blue, practical, he got out alone. A sound like green wood splitting. He was wearing a coat against the cold, and he looked like a man who has been through something significant and is carrying it correctly, not performing recovery, but actually doing the work of it, which looks different and is harder. He had lost weight. Not badly, he carried it well, the way people carry changes that come from internal shifts rather than external pressure. His eyes were the same, that particular, calibrated attention that had caught her uneven stride across a conference room on a November afternoon 11 months ago. He walked toward her, and she watched him walk, and when he reached her, he stopped and looked at the building, the clean brick, the wide windows, the name above the door, and he stood with her for a moment before he said anything. "It looks right," he said. "Yes," she said. He looked at her then. Down at her feet, an old reflex, she recognized it, the same reflex from the conference room. She was wearing good shoes this time. Solid, supportive, appropriate for a long day on her feet. Both of them clean. "The ankle," he said, 85%. "That's better than 4 months ago." Considerably, she looked at him. "The organization? Functional. Legitimate. Much smaller." He said it without self-pity and without performance. "The federal oversight period is 2 years. After that, clean record, clean structure." He paused. "It's a different kind of organization than it was." "Is that hard?" He considered the question seriously, which she appreciated because it deserved a serious answer. "Some days," he said. "Less than I expected. The things I thought I would miss, I don't miss them the way I thought I would." He paused. "The things I didn't know I would gain are different." Harder to describe. She understood that. The things that come from stopping
네.
pretense are always harder to describe than the pretense itself. Hida Meridian is still moving freight, she said. A lot of freight, legally on documented routes, with fully compliant staff and not a single person in the organization who has any reason to be afraid of a federal inquiry. He almost smiled. It turns out that's a viable business model. Surprising, she said dry. Completely unexpected, he agreed, and this time the almost smile became real, briefly, before it settled back into something quieter. The ceremony was small by design: the trust board, the therapy staff, community partners, several neighborhood association representatives, a few patients who had agreed to speak about what access to rehabilitation meant for their lives. No politicians, by unanimous board decision which had been Zuri's recommendation and which the board had adopted without dissent. Zuri spoke for 7 minutes. She had written the remarks and then rewritten them 3 times, removing each successive draft's tendency to explain too much and trust the audience, too little, until what remained was specific and true and said what it needed to say without using it to perform anything. She talked about Constance Yeo and what the center was designed to be. She talked about the 2,400 people the Renewal Foundation served annually and the additional capacity this building represented. She talked about what it meant to help an injured person rebuild their capacity for independent movement, and she used the phrase exactly as Constance Yeo had written it, because it was the right phrase and it had already been written, and there was no point in improving it. She did not talk about 34 floors. She did not talk about hiding. Those things were done, and she had learned what they cost, and she was not going to make them into a story, she told about herself. They were just part of what had happened, part of what had led here, and they would stay in that category. After she finished speaking, Marcus opened the center's doors formally, and the first patients came in, not a rush, a steady, considered stream of people who had appointments, who had been told about the center through community outreach that Marcus had been building for the past 2 months, who came through the door with the particular combination of hope and caution that belongs to people who have been hurt and are not yet sure whether this place is different. It was different. Not because it was perfect, it wasn't. It wouldn't be. Perfection wasn't the point, and had never been the point. It was different because the person who had designed it had understood that the patient at the door was a person first, and the person who was running it had spent 12 years learning the same thing, and the people staffing it had been hired with that as the primary criterion. Suk watched from near the back of the gathered crowd as people went through the door. He did not approach the door himself. He stood with his hands at his sides and watched, and Zuri, from across the courtyard, watched him watch, and understood that this was what he had come for, not recognition. Not a moment of redemption that closed the account neatly, but to see the thing exist. To know it was real. She walked toward him when the crowd had thinned. He looked down at her feet when she reached him again, the old reflex. She didn't comment on it. "You took the elevator," he said. Not quite a question. "This building only has 2 floors, she said. "But yes, the elevator," she paused. "Every time." He looked at her. The morning light was on his face, and the expression it revealed was not one she would have recognized 11 months ago. It was the expression of a man who has been through a significant reckoning and emerged not clean, because clean is not what reckonings produce, but clearer. More honestly himself, less invested in the management of what he appeared to be. "How is it?" he said. "Running something you built." "Frightening," she says honestly. "Necessary." A pause. "Worth it." He nodded slowly. They stood together in the October light while the center's first patients moved through its doors, and the building that Constance Yeo had designed 18 months before it was killed, and that had sat dark and boarded. For 6 years did the work it had always been intended to do, and the city moved around it with its usual indifference, and neither of them spoke for a while because there wasn't anything left to say that the building wasn't already saying. Then Zuri thought of something. Constance Yeo's complaint, she said. The one Byung-jun dismissed. The board finally reviewed it, the actual document, not his summary. "I know," Si-hyeok said. "My attorneys informed me." The board issued a formal acknowledgement. Now. She paused. 12 years late. Yes, she deserved to see it. Yes. His voice was very quiet. She did. Zuri looked at the door, where the last of the morning's arrivals were making their way in, moving with the careful, determined pace of people for whom walking is work, for whom getting here required something. She would have been good at this, Zuri said. Si-hyeok looked at the door. She was good at it, he said. The design proves it. He paused. You're going to be good at it, too. Zuri considered arguing with that on principle, because her instinct was still to deflect competence attributed to her future self, the version of herself that hadn't done the thing yet, the version that might still fall short. She noticed the instinct. She let it pass. Yes, she said. I am. The October light held them both in it, clear and cold and without mercy. The way real light is, it doesn't flatter, and it doesn't obscure, it just shows what's there. And what was there was a building full of people, doing the difficult, incremental, unglamorous work of recovery. A woman who had learned, slowly and at considerable cost, that strength and silence are not the same thing. A man who had dismantled the structure of his own power, because the alternative was to keep building on a foundation he could no longer pretend was solid. No clean resolution, no easy accounting. Just the specific, imperfect. A sound like green wood splitting, ongoing fact of a thing that had been broken by the people who had broken it, and the people who had survived the breaking, and the people who had come after, doing what they could with what remained. That was enough. It was, in fact, exactly enough.